Wow. All right. Hello and welcome to Spitfire episode 24, season 2. We are live today with a big topic that we have been talking about doing for probably 6 months or as long as we've known about franchising. My name is Brice. I'll be bringing you the topics and also playing devil's advocate at some points in this so we can discuss all aspects of CDL franchising. Joining me, of course, Chris Tunn doing the producing and asking questions in and when he can. But more importantly, our guests for this week. Joining us first, Richard Lewis. Congratulations again on winning eSports Journalist of the Year 2019.
Thank you, man. Congratulations for sitting next to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was the highlight of my night. So
cool,
yeah.
Table 5, man. We were the real winners, you know. I appreciate it, brother. I appreciate it, man. It was a surprise, put it that way.
No problem. It was great to see your speech as well. That was the highlight of the night. Also joining us, of course, Marty. And I believe you're, I want to say, performance vice president, Marty, from
you can make up and call whatever you want, honestly. So
it said SVP, and I thought, is that senior vice president of team performance? I couldn't remember.
Yeah. That's so. Basically, I have a fancy title to say I'm in charge of the coaches and the players and all the people who play the game. So.
And of course, for people who may not know, Marty was Team Splice, and that's obviously now gone into Toronto Ultra. So obviously you have kind of an inside view on the transition in. Oh, hold on 1 second.
Oh,
and
look at Mr. Sideways.
One more guest has managed to join us here. How are you doing?
I am here to formally apologize. When you guys said 8 p.m., I thought 8 p.m. Dallas time because I'm so self-centered that the world revolves around me and only me and didn't think about London. So, Brice and Tunn, please allow me to join the podcast next week. Everybody watching, I'm so sorry, but I'm in the middle of shooting stuff.
That's no problem.
Apologies.
That's okay,
but I had to come in and apologize personally. So
that's all right. I appreciate it, Hex. I appreciate it. We'll let you get back to your probably busy day. And sorry, next time I will make sure I double check.
I'm free at 8 o'clock, so if you guys want to hop on at 2 a.m., I am more than happy to hop on.
Looks like a good shoot, brother.
Yeah.
All right, boys. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Much love. Take care.
Bye.
See you, Hex. And that was Hex. Hex unfortunately can't join us this week. But I believe we were talking to you, Marty, about your intro into Toronto Ultra and so forth. I believe that's where we got to. So here's where we're going to start this, because the issue with this topic, guys, is that it is massive in scope. It is all-encompassing, and it has been going on, as far as I can tell, for possibly several years. So I was looking at this beforehand about what is possibly the biggest news about franchising and has been in the all the news feeds, and I think we've got to start with the 25 million buy-in fee that has been bandied about all the publications and everything like this, and that seems to be what everybody's talking about, right? In terms of return of investment, in terms of the 300 million number that every single fan likes to kind of put into the chat and talk about whenever any team does anything wrong. What was the kind of the first impressions? I'll start with you, Rich, because obviously Marty will have a slightly different view on this. What was your first impressions when this news kind of broke?
Well, already, I've already been through this once with, Overwatch, kind of covering that as well. And I'll probably talk a little bit about that. There are some slight differences, but Activision Blizzard obviously have this, idea now in the head that their franchising model is the best. It's the greatest. So what they do is, of course, there's lots of reasons why it's a $25 million buy-in, right? Okay. So the first thing is, you charge $25 million for everybody that gets to come and play, because that gives you such a huge slush fund of money up front that you immediately secure anything you need to do for the league. You cannot possibly lose money in year 1 or year 2 if you're Activision Blizzard. So, it's pretty risk-free. The second reason why you pay $25 million is that what you do by having a valuation like that is you create this promise, this guarantee that it's always going to hold that value or only go up, because if we expand, we promise to charge the next people that come in more. Kind of like, I don't want to use the word Ponzi scheme loosely. Activision Blizzard do not like it when I do that. So I'll say that. But Ponzi scheme does operate in that way. but that doesn't mean that this is a Ponzi scheme. So let me frame it that way. But what they do is, you see, then they charge the next lot of people who come in 60. Well, congratulations, your slot, which is finite, there's only so many of them, now has gone up in value. They're now selling for 60 mil. I've just given you over a double return. Now, of course, it's pie in the sky. The number is just arbitrary. And the third thing is as to why it's $25 million is it lures you in because they start talking about, first of all, it's a great headline grabber. So then they say, hey, we're going to give you all this revenue share of all of the millions we're able to generate over a 5-year period. In fact, you'll be profitable by year 3, most likely. And of course, the VC people, the investors that are used to throwing that kind of money around, think $25 million actually isn't all that much for a sports team that's going to start turning a profit in 3 years. Of course, the reality that we're starting to find, if you go look at the Overwatch League, is it's going to have some problems. These, revenue and profit are not the same. So far payouts have been, how should we say, minimal over in that neck of the woods. I think anybody that knows about the Overwatch League would be very apprehensive about investing in the Call of Duty one as well. But the final point I'll make on this, and then throw it over to Marty, is that the reason that these big VC groups feel comfortable investing the amount of money they do is because they're not buying it because they give a flying fuck about the franchise. They don't care about being part of the league. They don't really care. It's not a $25 million pet project for them. They just know that in a year or two, if it all goes wrong and things are looking a bit wobbly, they can get out and their portfolio of brands that they all own, because everyone likes to own multiple teams now, despite the conflict of interest, it adds value to that. I can even take out more VC money on the promise of selling in the future because I have a $25 million franchise. Okay. So it's a lot of smoke and mirrors. It's a lot of bullshit, frankly.
Here's the interesting thing about that, and this relates to Marty, right? So Marty, you came in slightly different because you were what we frequently refer to as a legacy team into franchising, right? You were spliced beforehand. You were involved in Call of Duty. Not every one of these teams has that pedigree. So for you, you had considerably more information going into this than a lot of teams. I think there's only a few kind of legacy teams in this, maybe 4, maybe 5. So these VCs that have come in outside don't have the same viewpoint you do, but you made the decision to, obviously Splice is now folded into Toronto Ultra, and Toronto Ultra is now the brand for Call of Duty. What did you make about, this side of it? And obviously, what you can and can't say being on the inside, I'll let you decide.
Yeah, first I'll say, you guys can hear me okay?
Yeah,
absolutely.
First I'll say I fully appreciate that Richard's kind of on I won't say the other side, but I'm glad we have a dissenting opinion, because it would be pretty boring if we're like, oh, the league's so great, blah blah blah, here's how awesome it is, and everyone's just
you haven't always liked my dissenting opinions.
Hey, if we can't have a good argument, then what good is life, right?
Arguments I don't mind. You blacklisted publications I worked at.
Oh man, it only took 3 minutes. Holy shit!
If you like dissenting opinions so much, it kind of seems a strange thing to do. Just a point.
I mean, all right. I tell you what. We'll come to that maybe later in the podcast. Marty, if you could just stay on topic for now, about your entrance into the CDL and the money that meant to come in.
Sure. So a couple things. First, let's get out of the way. I'm going to be looked at as the corporate shill here, right? So I'm a New Yorker. I got to get that just out in the front. Is I get that people are going to be like, he's full of shit. He's just going to say what his PR person. We have a PR person, right? So yes, I have all those things. I've also been in this industry for a number of years now, and I actually give a shit. I love esports. I go to tons of events, and I did this not because I wanted to make money. I joined esports because I thought it was freaking awesome at the beginning, and that was it. And so when I looked at the Call of Duty League, yes, more information, I would say, as in, I think I understood the opportunity differently. I think that if you're looking at it and you're a traditional sports owner who's your first time, or even one who's just doing Overwatch, because Overwatch, to Richard's point, is very different, right? It's very different than the other models. Then you don't have necessarily the perspective of anything other than data that's being put in front of you, financial models, your own traditional way of you look at an investment and what the possible return is, all those kind of traditional ways you look at any investment, right? Versus no different than when I first started in esports back in 2013. I was looking at this as what I saw, something that myself and like millions of other people loved, and this has got to turn into something, right? So it wasn't about like any specific numbers or any specific financial model that initially started, obviously, us down this road. All that stuff matters in codifying spending a lot of money, of course. I'm not going to say that we just decided to spend all this money based on a gut feeling, okay? But I'm saying the gut feeling mattered, and when looking at things and what the opportunity is. I think Call of Duty specifically as a title for me was one of the most important parts of this, because it is a underserved esports where Activision's done some stuff in the last few years, but by no means what we've seen from other publishers or the potential of what they can do. Like comparatively, for example, the campaigns they did around Overwatch when the league launched, we've yet to see the behemoth of a marketing engine that is Activision around Call of Duty esports. So people love to point and go, how can you invest this money in a thing that gets 30 or 40 or 50K concurrent viewers, right? I don't see something that gets 30 or 40 or 50K concurrent viewers. I see something that can fill stadiums when the full player base of Call of Duty is out there potentially seeing the opportunity to watch this esport. I also do think that when I don't know if I'm even allowed to talk about the price, so I'm not going to go about it. It doesn't really matter. We all know it's a lot of money, right? I think one of the things that, whether you believe it's a right decision or wrong decision, why, I think part of it was a want to have a certain type of owner. And fans get really negative about this because they love their endemic owners and they love certain people they've seen growing up. And I get it, right? It's the entertainment world in a nutshell. And in the entertainment world, a lot of times it's the people who have money who build these companies and succeed. And the ones who are kind of at the kernel and the growth don't get there because they don't have access to capital. But I think that there's that fear of people being well capitalized. We've seen so many stories of players. I mean, this year, literally the year we just finished, how many players got screwed out of prize money or salary, right? This isn't like a foregone many years ago thing. This literally happened 6 months ago. And yes, I get a lot of the perspectives of why people would think that there are nefarious reasons for a larger buy-in than, let's say, what Riot did, for example. I think that there's also some ways of saying, let's make sure we have really, really well capitalized organizations that are going to be really healthy or have really high access to play this out for the long term. Because at least from the people I talk to, I don't think anybody is looking to be profitable in year 3. I think people are going, this is a 10, 15-year venture like a sports team would be. It's
interesting that point, because now when I speak to people who enjoy Call of Duty esports but aren't, because even myself and Tunn, right, we're in a circle more so than your average fan. Right. And I get asked frequently, where's the return of investment? Where's X, Y, and Z? How much are these teams paying for? Because here's the thing. And I know you can't talk about money in this regard, but the 25 mil thing has been bandied around by everybody that I know, and the 300 million. But I've always put forward the case that it's not a 300 million investment into the league, because it doesn't take into account the venues and the infrastructure that these teams are putting into place. It doesn't take into effect the 1.575 salary cap million, that is, which I know for a fact that some teams have hit, straight out of the gate. And that's year on year. And that doesn't include their staff, and it doesn't include coaches, and it doesn't include all the other things they're supposed to be bringing, PR, marketing. All these people need to be paid. And obviously, for me, I don't know as much of the business side as I would like to, because it's not my area of expertise. My expertise is the game. But I get that is the number one asked question to me, and probably the same as Tunn, about the inner workings of just, is this money going to come back? And some people are thinking the VCs are going to want their money back in 5 years. Some people are thinking, maybe they just they're in for the flip, and so on and so forth. I think realistically, it's one of these big questions, and it has been the most asked thing about money going forward into franchising, because we've seen players already sign $1 million contracts for this.
But Marty's definitely telling you no lies about the philosophy of why certain type, of why setting the price so high and attracting a certain type of owner. Again, this goes back to Overwatch when Activision Blizzard, because Bobby Kotick was already very interested in doing something with some of his big business cronies, and Robert Kraft had already gone to BlizzCon and said, yeah, I could see myself investing in this. It was already the idea to basically a big fuck you to all the endemic esports orgs. That was the original plan. In fact, when they did the original meeting and pitch meeting, it was something like 30 of the biggest sports owners and VC groups already in America. And I think there was like 1 or 2 endemic esports guys at that
I was
meeting?
actually at that meeting, and that may be what the outside looked like, but there was a ton of us there. I went over and talked to probably 15, 20 endemic owners. Now, I will say they're the biggest teams. It wasn't like they were inviting the smallest ones for sure, but there was a very good mix of people that come from both sides, I would say.
I mean, I don't know if we're talking about the same meeting.
Talking about the Overwatch one, or I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
the very first Overwatch one, which was
Right.
sort of headed up by Robert Kraft and his pals.
Yeah, the one that had like the iconic photo now of Kroenke, Kraft, and Jack Etienne sitting in the watching the World Cup.
Yeah, I don't know if I've seen that iconic photo. It's probably not that iconic to me.
Well, everyone saw it and made such a big deal about it
Yeah.
because, like, oh my God, we have these two sports owners sitting with Cloud9's CEO. What does this mean for the future of esports? You know?
Well, I mean, regardless, there was basically a very big focus on getting, these big names in, and not so much the endemic esports people. There were several people that were basically told to go fuck themselves. There were several people to be told, we may consider you, because the original plan was to have a draft over in Overwatch, and they said if you don't contract an Overwatch team now, we might consider you at a later date because we don't want to have to enact a buyout for a draft. And then they realized, they looked at the legality of that and all things they need to have in place if they wanted to do a draft system, and moved away from it. So they did fuck over a lot of endemic people. But what was hilarious was when they couldn't sell all the slots to those, big people that they wanted. In fact, famously, there was a number of high profile sports people that kind of pulled out and said, actually, yeah, this isn't for me. And that was even after they dangled a bullshit Morgan Stanley report that compared it to WWE and said that 50% of people that watch Overwatch competitively will buy related merchandise and other just nonsense. I mean, the numbers are just la land. They had to go back begging to the endemic esports people to get them in, provided they could get some funding to do so and create these dual partnerships. I don't know if Marty is one of those dual partnerships or not. Because
we weren't a year one team. We were actually a year two team.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Yeah. So anyway, so off the back of that, that they did want to attract this certain type of owner. But you have to also remember that's not a guarantee of quality. That's not a guarantee people are going to get their money. Remember, Infinite was a certain type of owner. So we all know exactly how that's panned out. In fact, they really liked Infinite over Activision Blizzard because they were going to let them create a huge conflict of interest in the contenders scene with very dubious contracts. So the idea that a certain type of owner kind of creates a better class of league is absolute nonsense. These people don't understand esports, and they're businessmen and corporations are generally shady as fuck, and they'll nickel and dime everyone they can and not pay people where they can get away with it. That's it's a profit driven enterprise. So
I think it's interesting that kind of point, because there is. So here's one of the things that people have in the run up to all of this happening, right? There was, and we've known about franchising for a while. I did say several months ago, if you're being perfectly honest, you can see a 3-year route from Call of Duty from where it was into franchising. The things they changed each year. But my main point is this: a lot of people have been comparing Overwatch to Call of Duty, and while there are a lot of similarities, there are some differences. Like the heavy legacy teams are more embedded into Call of Duty than Overwatch. For instance, the fact that we do have Optic Gaming, although in a very different fashion now, into Call of Duty. FaZe has come through, Splice, while no longer holding the name, and Envious, have gone and got their second, the Dallas franchise. It does seem like any kind of comparison to Overwatch, slightly, they look like they changed their mind, I will say, about those endemics, because they realized that the brands in Call of Duty were one of its main strengths. And it wouldn't actually surprise me to see, if some of the people investing in it kind of still wanted those endemic brands in, because when it comes to Call of Duty, you knew the biggest names were going to be FaZe, Envious, Optic Gaming, and technically 100 Thieves towards the end, and United and that sort of thing. Not all of them made it in, of course, but there have been more people that have kind of come through than in the Overwatch situation.
So I guess I'll say it like this: when we looked at Overwatch each year, right? Like we looked at it the first year, we looked at the second year, obviously, and made the move, and it depended on a myriad of factors of why we did. But one of the things that I remember having a very specific conversation with our investors is, I think the biggest Overwatch star, quote unquote, at the end of season 1 had like 70K Twitter followers, right? Like very small impact compared to not even like Scump, like just some of the middle-sized influencers in Call of Duty. And so coming into Call of Duty, it was very different. for sure in how you built a team even. Right.
Uh-huh.
If you're if you are going to build a brand for the first time, let's pretend Hector didn't exist and didn't get to have the legacy that he does bringing players. I imagine most owners went, well, wait a minute. There's certain guys out here in the market that by themselves bring enough brand that it isn't even about winning anymore, right? That it's about the fact that they will establish us as a player in the market, right? As an important brand. And that field's leveled a bit because though Optic and FaZe are, as you said here, that's it, right? The other 10 are more or less brand new brands. I think that so there's that aspect right there. I think that the one thing though that does come from Overwatch, at least we've seen. Look, I'm humble enough to know the mistakes we've made along the way in building our company and learn from them. And it's crazy to watch how Defiant's fan base is going to probably surpass Splice. Like that to me is mind blowing, right? And part of that is regional, right? The fact that if you are an Overwatch fan and you like you're relatively in that part of Canada or even the northeast part of like places like New York and Wisconsin and places like that, you're a Defiant fan. Whereas Splice, let's say in League of Legends or in Counter-Strike or any of the games we've been in, you have to have a reason for specifically that team. Sometimes it's the players, sometimes it's legacies. It could be a myriad of things, but it's not as cut and dry. And I think that that part at least is really like interesting coming into this new league. Is yes, there's some people who will be like legacy Optic fans or legacy fans of FaZe or even players, right? Like some people are going to be formal fans or scum fans, etc. But I think there's a really cool opportunity for fans to be New York fans or fans to be Dallas fans and really take ownership of their team. I mean, I grew up a sports fan long before I was an esports fan, and that tribalism was always really important to me, right? Like going to the arena, watching the Knicks get their ass kicked, but being part of a group of people that like really loved our team because they were our local team. So yes, it is very different. And I totally get why you say that we should be careful of the comparisons because also it's a game that has a lot of history, right? Just not even just the teams, but the esport itself. But I also think that there's at least some learnings over 2 years of Overwatch with a similar model that we can take opportunity from.
Yeah, unfortunately, what I've seen so far, I don't think Activision Blizzard are applying any of the practical lessons that you should learn from the Overwatch League to the Call of Duty League. The only difference seems to be they've allowed 3 brands to retain some semblance of their own identity.
I think it's 2: Atlanta FaZe and Optic LA.
In terms of just logos, yeah.
Yeah, it's very curious though, Marty, about you said there, that you only see 2 of them as endemic because realistically, from my point of view, as far as I can tell, we basically got double Optic in the league at the moment. Huntsman have kind of taken over that thing because here's the thing, right? Because of the legacy of Call of Duty, people are following players and personalities. And I would say Toronto Ultra has done the same thing. Well, obviously it's a new brand, but you've got the same coach from Splice. You're from Splice. You even when you picked up Ben Bantz again, that was they stood out. I'm home once more with Splice. So while Toronto Ultra is a new brand, I don't think you can deny that a lot of people are still seeing you as Splice's the next generation of Splice. Like it is, and same with Dallas Empire. They've got Hastro and. Astro's a big name in Call of Duty. And obviously a lot of people are going to gravitate towards that band. Obviously, they've got great players as well. But at the same time, they know where they stand with him.
Yeah, and I guess I'm more talking about the future, right? So like when I mentioned earlier about this idea that I don't think 30, 40, 50,000 concurrents is where Call of Duty is going to be as this grows and we have a real marketing engine behind it and like real focus on growing the esport rather than it being a side project, let's say. And I think that to me is where the local, like you're 100% right for what we'll say the endemic, the fans that are coming along, right? Where they're going to see Hastro or they're going to see Hex or people like myself or even Looney, now coming back again. And that's going to draw them to a team. But I think that's exciting as we bring more and more fans in for that obvious local connection to be like, one of the things that like even I get excited about seeing cool things that happen in esports, even after doing it for these years, was when we did our first Defiant watch party last year. It was like we didn't have a ton of marketing budget, and it wasn't like a big thing, but we had the Real Sports Bar, which is where the Raptors have their viewing parties. Right. And the place was like completely full, completely red and black. It was that tribalism, that like really exciting of local fans rallying around their team. And it was just really cool to witness and see that these people were like taking ownership of the team in that local capacity that, yes, we get to do it digitally, but there's a whole nother like really cool thing about being local and physically there, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the other big marketing points people have been talking about, right? This localization of what essentially is a global phenomenon. Like for me, obviously, I'm from the UK, and if you have any idea of the history of the UK and college esports, it's never a fun time. But truth
one
being,
time.
all right, one time in the last 8 years. Doesn't take away the last 8 years, of course. But it's an interesting one because even now, we spoke about players and being in these positions, and obviously, right, I refuse to believe that one of the big pitches for franchising in Call of Duty wasn't, by the way, here's our 10-year legacy, here's these players with several million followers. You can essentially buy a brand by picking up the right people. It's a massive jump start on
and understand who gets the fucking benefit of that, right? It's okay. So these owners and VC groups, I mean, they're building something that they don't even own holistically. So, you understand that the brands are retained by Activision Blizzard, right? That if they sell, the brand remains. You don't go and take the successful, London Spitfire or, what was it, Toronto Ultra. You don't take that with you on the way out, and Toronto gets another cool name. And no. It's always going to be Toronto Ultra in that league. So let's say, Marty manages to, be successful like he wasn't at Splice and does good and builds up a successful brand. He's just going to, if they sell or they want to get rid of him, he's just going to take a portion of the equity out the door. And by the way, the sale terms aren't even that great. Activision Blizzard win twice. You pay massively on the way in, you get fucked massively on the way out, and you're building success for another company just on the basis, a promise of revenue share that might not even turn around. I mean, this is the disingenuous framing of the franchising we've got going on right now in esports, is this idea that it's we're all building something incredible. These are brands that have no history, no pedigree beyond what the staff and the players bring to the table, and you're going to leverage all of that for a huge corporate entity like Activision Blizzard, who, by the way, don't give a solitary fuck about any of you, just for the tawdry promise of a revenue share that might make it worthwhile in the long run. And I think the franchising model that we've got in place at the moment, it's not that I'm entirely against franchising, you understand, as a fan of American sports. This isn't even franchising per se. It doesn't have any of the protections and safeguards in place that you get in franchises. Overwatch League doesn't even have a fucking players association. So, it's basically a rich boy's toy to make as much money for potentially the VC groups when they asset flip their orgs, but mostly Activision Blizzard and Bobby Kotick, who wants to have all the money in the world all of the time.
Sorry, go on, Marty. I'll let you take it.
I just want to say, like one thing I can openly take, I don't know if I take ownership of, but I can acquiesce to, is until we prove anything, it's all just words, right? So I get that, right? It's a bunch of talk, and it's a bunch of promises, and it's a bunch of we're going to do this and we're going to do that. So I can get skepticism 100% until we actually go out and do some of these things, drive real revenue, drive towards profitability, show that this model that we think can work, ultimately none of us know, right? We think can work. We have to prove it. So it's not crazy to be skeptical. And in fact, skepticism is I think, healthy in our industry. We've had a lot of ups and downs over the years, obviously, that drive that for very good reason. So I don't think it's wrong to be skeptical. I guess I've maybe that's the founder in me, is I have this eternal optimism, right? That there's exciting opportunity to grow and to be part of something cool that we can do to make really cool entertainment for people. I've been in entertainment now for 18 years. And I have to sometimes temper that with the fact that there's reality, right? There's reality to what the giant work that's in front of us, the giant mountains we're going to have to overcome, because none of these things are easy. It's not going to be easy to all of a sudden have millions of concurrent viewers. It's not going to be easy to monetize to the level that we need to make this a worthwhile investment. I don't have any disillusion or illusions of that being the case. So.
But Marty, and I don't want you to take this as if I'm trying to pick on you, right? Because I do appreciate you coming on the show. Actually, I noticed you unblocked me on Twitter as well, so thank you for that. Right, but so here's the thing, Marty. Though you've done it on hard mode and failed. Okay, franchising is easy mode esports, because you can't get fucking relegated, can you? You're in the league no matter what. You can be Shanghai Dragons, go 0 to fucking 40, and you still make money, and you're still in the league, and you still get your cut. And what they did in Overwatch, because Robert Kraft got upset about Boston Uprising t-shirts not selling as much as everybody else's, it used to be that the people who sold the most got the most money, but then what they did was they changed it so everybody gets it equal. So your successful brand offsets the unsuccessful brands. The reason that you owners love this fucking franchising mode is it gives you all of the protections without you having to actually be good at your jobs and successful. Let's just put that on the fucking table, because to say otherwise is an absolute lie.
So I'll be honest, I'm not on the business side much anymore. So I don't focus on like a lot of the changes around the revenue and such. I really am purely for the last year focused on making winning teams, right? So I want to preface that as in, I don't know all the business terms like the back of my hand, like I used to. I certainly obviously had a heavy investment in that for when I was the CEO. That said, I will say that there is still like, the league has to succeed for all that to happen. For all the things you're talking about, for us to succeed, the league has to. So for that, like I can tell you the conversations we have as owners and the way we interact with each other is really about the entire league succeeding, because we all know, like, 3 of us can't Cleveland Browns this, right? Like, we can't, because the league can't fucking handle that right now. Like, I don't see there's anybody out there that even considers that. The Call of Duty offseason was fucking ruthless. It was ruthless. Everybody wanted the best, biggest brands with the best players. And you're right, Brice. People were willing to spend for that, which I don't know that I fully expected. You know, there's been growth in Call of Duty salaries.
Growth is putting it mildly.
No, there was growth before that, I'm saying. This was just like I'm not going to lie. Like, I was like, wow, okay, there really are other players in the market. It used to be only like 4 or 5 of us that were really willing to fight for the top players. You know, there was like us and Optic and FaZe and just a few others really fighting for the top players. And that's why we were all in the top 4 of every event, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that that's certainly changed. And what I find the most interesting about that kind of this is all, like, obviously you guys can't all see this, right? Like, people can't see the conversations we're having. People can't see the mentality, I guess, that I'm seeing, is that people going, we've just all put a shit ton of money into this. Now, how do all 12 of us teams make sure that we all succeed? That's what's more important right now than anything.
So here's the interesting thing, and obviously, you know, we spoke before. You guys haven't watched this show before. Well, I've been accused myself of being slightly critical of some of the hiring methods that some teams have done in the off season. It has been a kind of a running joke going on, and here's my issue with some of the off season. I think realistically, some of these teams, just to kind of sum it up for what you guys have missed, some of these teams have not made the right moves and have certainly made what I would call comical decisions, and it essentially been robbed by people asking for considerable amounts of money who really don't have the qualifications for it. But that aside, I want to play devil's advocate for just a second, because while we can talk about, you know, franchising on the business side and what it is, I think one of the positive reasons for franchising, and it is one of the biggest ones here, is obviously, Marty, you alluded it to early on. We had 2 scumbag orgs last year, lowest of the low. It's Red Reserve and I actually forgot the other guy's name. Denial. Denial robbed somewhere in the region of 300,000 at least from players last year. Just straight up stole from them.
I mean, that's not Red Reserve stole that much, and then Denial were...
Both of them scums. Absolutely terrible people who should never ever be allowed back in again.
There were individual players that lost close to 6 figures in a single year.
Yeah, and obviously franchising, there should be more protections in place for that. While I'm always going to be an advocate for a players' association, obviously getting COD players to do anything all together at once is like herding cats. But cats have been set on fire. It's interesting for me to see, you know, the positive franchising. For me, a little bit like Richard, I am very much like in favor of like the NFL in the way that franchises work in there. I'm a big favor of drafts and that sort of stuff with protections that go in both sides. I just thought it's interesting to note the positive sides of franchising, right? Because, you know, it has been pointed out, players a lot of the time don't know what they're doing. People have been signing things. We had the Midnight Palaver last year where a very, very successful team turned around and asked, oh, actually, can we get paid a little bit more than all these massive teams are beating? And they just dropped the entire team. And said, no, bollocks to you. Go around and do whatever else. We don't care. We'll take your positive thing and you can piss off. So I feel like there is the positive of franchising there, that there is more structure for players this year. And it has been done with some professionalism. And obviously, you know, the deluge of agents floating around kind of puts pay to that.
Well, Brice, I don't know if you realize this, there's guaranteed contracts now, right? Like that's a big deal. Like to your point, you sign a player in the NBA, you're making a commitment, right? There's the unfortunate side. I'm a big basketball fan. We all know about contract years, and then the guy the next year who decides he's no longer going to try very hard. So that's always a risk. I hope we don't see a lot of that, but I will say that the positive side is that player, when they're signed, knows for the years they're signed, they're guaranteed to get paid. And I think that's a big step for the industry in a player having that level of protection. The example you made of a denial situation, it isn't just the organization now that there are ways to penalize and ways for the league to actually go after it and all those kind of things like that. It's that the players can't have a scenario where it's like, hey, you know what, Brice, you were great, but you're now gone for the rest of the year, right? Like you just don't have a job anymore. And I think that's been a real challenge for some players throughout the year. I won't name any specific ones, but there have been guys whose entire careers have been altered by being dropped at the wrong moment and literally having no opportunity.
Yeah, and that's a good thing, right? I agree. That's one of the good things that franchising brings, but that it comes with a ton of caveats that actually, I would say overall for the top players and the level of players that would be considered for a franchise league anyway in the first place, I think they come out at a net loss, frankly. First of all, let's talk about salary caps, and they have this thing called the luxury tax, which they've been running in the Overwatch League, which basically means that if you go over a certain amount collectively, you know, the percentage that you go over you get sort of essentially fined that amount of money, and it gets distributed by all the other teams that stay within that limit. Well, of course, any salary cap limits potential, earnings for star players. And on top of that, I know this goes on, the team owners all speak to themselves and they basically help lower the ceiling of salaries. That's something that can't happen outside of the franchising bubble, not without some sort of mega collusion and everybody in the world deciding to get on the same page. You know, it doesn't happen anymore in Counter-Strike, despite attempts of certain North American owners to do that. It will happen in franchising leagues. Absolutely. All these owners are at the same meetings, all talking to each other. And as Marty has alluded to, and in fact actually said out and out, the league must succeed. And we are all part of that endeavor. In fact, our teams can fail and flop and fall by the wayside and go 0-40. As long as the league's okay, though, we're on that money teat. On top of that, it's been reported, I think, much like the Overwatch League as well, the Call of Duty players won't be able to stream like they used to. You won't be able to stream your pickup games. You won't be able to be on stream playing with like one or two other players in the league, because that will be considered a pickup game. There'll be certain types of content you can't stream. You can't stream during the season. If you're a pro player, while the other matches are on that you're not participating in, you can't do anything that will deviate from the traffic goals of the league. So that's a big blow if you're in Call of Duty, because streaming in any eSports, streaming is a huge part of your supplementary income.
Is that confirmed, Rich? Is that confirmed?
Yeah, can I just hop on a couple of those points because I don't want to get too far away from them. So the streaming thing, just to be aware, almost everyone's going to be playing. And so there isn't going to be a lot, like, I don't know specifically the streamers, I'll be honest with you. Again, not my area of expertise, but I can tell you that because of the way the league is structured, like, you're not going to have a lot of times where Brice wants to stream, but there's a game going on and can't stream. I don't think that's going to be a lot of the occasion.
What if you don't play in the starting lineup and you want to stream at home watching the games?
That's totally fair point. You're right. There are going to be people in that scenario. I don't.
Well, they won't be allowed to stream.
Sure. I'm saying like that is, I guess there will be some exceptions, right?
Keep in mind the squad size is a 10, right?
7 is the required. We happen to be 10 because we decided to go for a full 2 squads to be able to play against each other.
So, I mean, that's potentially a lot of players that are going to be sat at home, not involved in the games, and they're not going to be able to do anything on game week that involves streaming while those games are on, because Activision Blizzard is so precious about viewership numbers. Which, by the way, is interesting. They've got that rule in place, isn't it? When they're publicly saying, oh, we've moved to the AMA model now. We only care about the average minutes. So actually, peak viewership shouldn't matter at all to them anymore. And yet they implement these rules that are going to limit periphery players' income.
Yeah, I mean, like I said,
and there's no player association in place either, which makes it, for me, unconscionable to place any limits on players' earnings when they don't have a platform to fight back against that. But what the fuck do I know?
I'll just say, like, again, for me, probably not fair for me to speak on it because I don't really have the knowledge, and I'd be speaking with very little knowledge. I can say that I don't know about the limitations on what you can stream, because certainly there is a ton of scrim streaming going on right now. It's probably happening almost all day, every day from players. So I don't know what those limitations are off the top of my head. I can say that I think that the this is specific to Call of Duty, not other games, because obviously other titles like League of Legends has had substitutes or academy rosters or things for a period of time, and Counter-Strike has had other games have had other people making incomes. But outside of a very small number of teams, people were not making a wage. They were maybe making a small stipend, or they were, or for sure, it's only 5 players. Now you have 2 additional players getting a salary, and it's a really pretty decent salary considering that you're a substitute player, someone who might never play. So I think that there are, again, pluses and minuses. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, that now the 6th and 7th person, because everyone's required to have a little depth on their bench, now have can make a living, right? They're now going to get paid to grow their career.
Here's my question on that regard, because I didn't know if that was. I knew that was a thing in Overwatch. I haven't seen anything player wise or anything come out.
I think it was reported in the eSports Observer.
It was definitely a thing in
which is generally a good publication.
Yeah, it was definitely a thing a couple of years ago. I think they got rid of it to a point during the league last year. I think it was in, but talking back to what you were saying about them, they were trying to engross these things where you would actually start to get things in to do with how they're going to use franchising. So it wouldn't surprise me if it's in, because it's been in before in Call of Duty. So
yeah, well, that's the thing. They've had it in, like you said, last year they had that in, and they actually got rid of it. Players were actually banned from. Yeah, players were actually allowed to stream during the event, and they made you were allowed to, if you're a player, you could even stream the event. I think Chino was allowed to and stuff. So it's very curious because, like I said, I still haven't seen anything really kick off from the players because of the amount of scrims that are going on. Like everybody's streaming whatever they want to at the moment. So I don't know whether that
doesn't technically start till January, so it might be from when the league starts.
That would be very true. It'd be interesting. I mean, so we talked a little bit about, Marty said week in, week out, these players are going to be playing. And bearing in mind, obviously, these players are paid a lot of money. Some of them, I think, too much from what I've heard on the back end. Some of them maybe not enough. I think people have been undervalued. But the schedule has come out. And one of the big talking points is the fact that these are a different kind of events. Now, Call of Duty has always been a very unique esport for many reasons, one of which is being the fact that we still regularly throw massive opens. That's a staple of our esports calendar. Don't really know any other esport that does it with as regular as we do or to the scale that we do. I know they used to do in several esports. And some of the fans are saying, are we going to miss that magic of the large opens? Obviously, last year it was split into the open bracket and pro bracket anyway, which was another step along the path towards franchising. But this year it is localized events with not all the pro teams, and it's in various places around the world.
It's definitely different, isn't it? I think it's just, I suppose, what we're used to. But I think like we lost it last year to a point because I think that the magic, so to speak, of the Opens was that anyone at the venue out of these 200 teams could go on to win it. But that was gone last year. So I suppose it's not going to be much different from last year in that respect.
So I guess it's interesting because I see kind of, Chris, I see your point that last year the separation between the pro teams and the AMs was really apparent, right? Because they, from after event 1, basically they became their own league. Is what we had 2 leagues basically, right? I saw it initially as a positive because the AMs now had a very clear way to make their own prize money, right? They had a way to showcase themselves throughout the year, and some of those guys are on teams this year. And I think partially because of that, I think we saw one of the largest amount of AMs moving up to pro that we've seen, in years. At least it looked that way. The amount of people, not even just in the season of 2019, but the amount who have now moved on to teams for 2020. And I think that at least some part of that was the fact that we had a good showcase now for these AMs, because they weren't just there to play the pro teams who just happen to not qualify for, and are eventually going to stomp through them and get into the bracket, right? They had their own place to really showcase themselves. So I guess I remember being cautiously optimistic at the beginning of 2019 the same way, right? Like, wow, this is very different. Are we going to miss the opportunity to see like a Mind Freak run through the bracket, right, or something like that? But at the same time, it in a way almost highlighted more some of the accomplishments of some of the amateur teams.
Yeah, I think the thing is with that though is that at the end of the year we got champs where we would sort of get to the point of where these amateur teams would be able to go up against the pro teams. We don't know anything about that this year, which is
that's true.
It's a big disappointment for me personally. I think and it sort of goes back to what Richard was saying before, that nobody can be relegated. You are sort of in a safe spot, which is, I mean, you get it to a point, but it is still quite like disappointing, because that used to always be a thing in Call of Duty where there would be an underdog. I mean, it's the same in other esports. You don't get that story anymore, unfortunately, which is one of the bigger disappointments for me.
Here's an interesting thing about the move into franchising, which for me is interesting, because it seems some teams are more invested in the league than some others, and we've highlighted some rosters and stuff that we wonder who's actually hitting the salary cap with these teams. But the other thing is the facility talk. There is this talk about a higher standard of infrastructure for players and coaches and so on and so forth. Now, again, this is me being critical of some of the hirings here, where players are brought into teams without even coaches or GMs. But that doesn't even include all the other things. Sports psychologists we're supposed to see. We know the Vikings, Minnesota, have already said about here's going to be our massive facility for our players to play in. And obviously, I imagine it's going to be very similar with when they go to their home events. Other teams, aren't looking like they're going to have those facilities. I don't know which ones are going to go down, but we actually don't know exactly everywhere where it's going to be right now. It looks like Paris, for instance. I imagine their players will be based in the States, and they're only going to kind of fly back themselves to go to the venue they've arranged for. But it is very curious for me that there doesn't seem to be like a standard for any of this yet. And I don't know whether that's just what we see on the outside, Marty, or something that's each team's dealing with on a very individual basis.
So yeah, no, that's a good question. I think that at least what I've observed so far is the security of having the franchise slot, right? So now you have an asset that you're building against over time is allowing more people to say things like, I'm going to build a facility is a good example, right? Instead of renting short term, which isn't a very good way to do it, right? Where I can actually build or have an investment. And by the way, that's an attractive tool for getting players, right? Like we know, we've seen it in League of Legends for years now, that players talk to each other and say, hey, wow, this has been a great place to live, or this has been a great place to work, or the PCs are shit, right? Or their food is garbage, right? Like these are things people talk about. And so I think that there certainly is an incentive, at least on that level, because recruitment is so important in Call of Duty, right? We just talked about the brand value of these players and how, like, in a couple of years, we're going to have another one of these crazy free agencies like we do right now, right? When these guys become free agents again. By the way, I'm just on a side note, this is the craziest free agency I've ever seen in my life in any game ever. There's never been a game where it was like literally all the players are available. Oh, and by the way, there's not just all the players are available, but they have it's a new game, right? Other games don't have this, obviously, so we don't yet know, will someone who was amazing at Black Ops be amazing at Modern Warfare, et cetera, right? So I think that there's that, first of all. Second of all, I think on the coaching front, there has been an immediate grab for the people who have experience, which there's so few in COD, right? Like so few. I mean, God, New York hired their coach and analyst barely after. I don't think the brand was even announced yet, right? And they'd already hired their folks, and that's partially because of some is, I would say, not necessarily inexperience isn't the right word, but knowing that experience is really valuable, right? Because they don't have necessarily the same long-term experience to hire lesser known people, right? To find an analyst who's out there doing really good work that doesn't have a big name or something like that. I can tell you from
isn't that the difficulty though, Marty? Like right now with essentially what I would call very few qualified people to run these teams. Like
yes, for sure. Like there are some people out there that got jobs running teams, and I'm like, okay, well, I don't think they're going to win, right? Like I'm that's kind of like I'm a competitive guy. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little bit like, all right, But at the same time, I think that's an overtime thing as we get more qualified people. it is a thing that League of Legends had the same issue 4 years ago. Like the people who were running those League of Legends teams were absolute garbage in some cases and some absolutely good. And the people that got trained up over time took those jobs over. And slowly but surely we have better people on the like general management, the coaches, the like sports psychologists, those people you're talking about, right? That infrastructure. There was nothing like what it was in 2015 to what it is like today. So I think some of it's just going to be training those people up over time. I don't think year one it's going to be amazing, right? But I don't think if we base everything on year one, then a franchise model doesn't make sense anyway. Why are we spending tens of millions of dollars if it's all about year one, right?
Yeah, okay, I can see that. But here's the thing, because it is, and I've said it before, I probably won't judge COD on its first year for several reasons. Like I didn't want to judge Overwatch on its first year because when the Overwatch League was new, obviously the hype was very, very real. The marketing was there and they did fantastic numbers. I want to see if it has the staying power as some other things, because realistically, Overwatch and to a lesser extent Call of Duty, because Call of Duty does have some legacy. But these franchises now have to go up against the Titans, right? The biggest games in esports that have dominated for year on year. League of Legends, CSGO, Dota, right? These are massive franchises with staying power. And I've always been very curious to see, what's next. I mean, Call of Duty is a unique point anyway, because we change the game every single year. And it's one of these things like you got to see,
and
how
they've said that's going to continue while the franchise league's in place as well. So
yeah.
That's awesome.
I was very curious to see, about their point to kind of push it forward into being a tier one, because now there's this much money in Call of Duty and Overwatch. While it's a subjective thing, a lot of people don't care what the label is. Being a tier one esport for me is always the goal for Call of Duty, and I believe it's always been just on the cusp. I mean, we have more social media than anybody else. Our events are fantastic, and we have these massive open events which engages the community like nobody else. So I'm curious to see, how that pushes forward now into the next 5 years of, right, are we going to be talking about COD in the same numbers like, oh, damn, we just did 1 million concurrent, right? I know, it's different metrics for different people, but for me, I want to see the timeline dominated by that. I want to see, thousands of fans, going, oh, wow, look at my game. It's doing fantastic. I love this. That's the kind of buy-in I want to see. It's the kind of buy-in I have.
I wouldn't worry about it, Brice. You absolutely will see that. And if those numbers aren't there, Activision Blizzard will just manipulate it to make it look like they are, because that's what they do for Overwatch. So I wouldn't worry. You'll get your fucking dream. You'll get your wish. It's all sunshine and roses and lollipops over in Overwatch. They keep putting out statements that one-off instances and spikes in traffic prove that actually viewership's up. The queue times are longer than they've ever been in the game, but apparently there's more people playing it than ever before. What the fuck do I know? Again, it's ridiculous. They are so inherently dishonest about the success of the esports. I wouldn't worry at all. They'll tell you Call of Duty's doing fine. I'm still trying to get my head around a franchise league where it's a different game every year as well, by the way. That's awesome.
In fairness, Rich, right? I will say that it's one of the things that I consider our biggest strength. Yeah, it's what makes us unique. It's what makes us unique. The thing about it, the thing about every single year, I've always said this, right? Because there's even more history in Call of Duty than people realize with that. Call of Duty did something that no esport has done since, and probably will never be able to do again. Because we managed to divide the fan base from the Xbox 360 into the Xbox One. So we had to change console, which is a big investment, as well as changing game. And then we went, right, well, we're done with the Xbox One. Let's go to PS4 and see if that works as well. So in the space of, I think it was 3-4 years, we changed hardware 3 times, as well as every single year we are playing a different game. Not just a different meta, fully different mechanics. And yet somehow we're still here, we're still doing very, very well. So for me, it's one of these things like, I believe it's a strength in the regard that if you aren't that enthralled by a game, you know that you only have to wait 9 months and you're going into a new one.
So I'll speak on this topic for a little bit, only because it's something that comes up all the time, as you can imagine, right? It's something very unique to COD, and it's usually a negative, right? Like it usually is people going, wow, like here's all the negatives of Call of Duty launching a new game every year. People complain about what things are working or not working in the game. There's complaints about the fact that the guys have to learn a new game and burn out. Like, don't get me wrong, some of these things are very important things. Like my number one goal is if I find an incredible young player, I want them to play for a super long time. I don't want them burning out because they have to play crazy amounts of hours because a new game comes out every year. You compare that to, my League of Legends player who takes a month off, right? Like they can actually do that and then come back at the right time and maintain their level. So these are real issues. So don't take that as what I'm saying. But what I was going to say that I think is interesting from a pure growth of the game perspective is Other games have lulls and we talk about them, right? When the World Championship's over, the game fades out of relevancy for a period of time. And there are bumps, like free agency is a bump, and then there'll be bumps for like certain stories that happen, maybe for boot camp, but they're nothing like during the season of the World Championship. Call of Duty is the game that has the most 365-day cycle of conversation going on. Because of the game, this period of leading into the holidays and the sales numbers and the fact that it's a conversation even outside of the esport, right? How does a new title doing? What does it mean to the future of Activision Blizzard? That drives the conversation on Call of Duty for much. It keeps its relevancy, I guess you'll say, right, in the pop culture conversation. And we can talk all we want about how we don't need pop culture or we don't need them. We were big enough as it is. And I get that, right? Like, I'm a nerd at my core, and I'm not saying that I want Johnny Football as a fan. And like, if we don't get that, we're going to lose. But I also am smart enough to know that it's great. The more people that watch this, the better for all of us, right? And so I think that there are some positive sides to the new game every year. You mentioned it in like the excitement of, if I don't like this game, there's a new one coming out, but there's also just less lulls in us not having Call of Duty at front of mind, I guess I would say.
Sure, and but it also seems a little bit contradictory in the sense that, you know, if it's hard enough for a pro player with experience to learn a new game, imagine what Johnny Football's feeling when he comes in. He's like, I've spent a year watching this game on TV. I've just got a handle on it. And then we change it all up again. And he's like, well, fuck this, dude. What I thought I knew, I don't know, because that doesn't happen in football. So that point seems a little bit contradictory to me. I think the bottom line is, there's a genius marketing element that's going on, actually, with this league, because we all know some versions of Call of Duty are better than others, right? We all know that. Well, players will never be able to criticize game balance or anything like that, all these big names with millions of followers, if they're playing in the league. It'll actually be forbidden in their contracts to do it. So every version of COD will be the best. Every version will be the one that's showcased in the league, apart from COD Mobile, which, by the way, Bobby Kotick would love to do an entire season in this franchise league of COD Mobile, most likely. It would be the perfect corporate synergy wet dream. So don't be surprised if that happens at some point, maybe at year 2, year 3, which is probably when they'll be winding down and just want to do one big last cash grab. But honestly, I think what they should do is they should at least commit for the first 2 years to using one version, just to enable the level of play to hit its inevitable ceiling and to let the players be comfortable with out having to learn new games, just like Marty's talking about. The burnout thing is very real in MOBAs, because you're constantly learning and constantly having to grind out practice to learn a new patch every 2 weeks. So I don't think you really want to push in a supposedly sporting professional area, an entirely new fucking game every year and say, hey, look, there'll never be a dynastic team. There'll never be a dynastic team in the COD League, because the players that win on one version might be utter dog shit on the next version if it's got jetpacks in and all sorts of fucking gimmicky shit. It's a fucking it's a conceptual nightmare. I can't even believe it's real.
I can see that, but like I said, I would stick up for COD here, and that somehow it works. I've heard that argument many times, Rich, and yet somehow it still works. We still have players that go, well, bearing in mind we do.
But I got nothing. You understand? I got nothing against it out there.
No.
In an open circuit, right? Because then you just pick and choose if you want to play at the tournaments, and you want to get a new player. You can do it at any time, and you can pay them whatever you want to dominate in that game. You will not be able to do this in a franchise league. It is a very different landscape.
Okay, yeah, I can kind of see that, and obviously it's been one of the things, right? I've heard especially pros say over and over again, what if we could play this for more than 1 year or do something? But I think the other issue is, I think there is part of the Call of Duty community that very much enjoys the grind. Like, I've seen players, when this game came out, doing 31-hour streams, which I thought was frankly ridiculous, not helpful and not, healthy at all. I understand why they do it, because, when the money's rolling in, you do whatever you want. But the truth is, as we talk about this, in terms of what is essentially, I think, an 8-9 month rotation, and we get 3 months off to reset and go for the next game. I've always thought, I am firmly on the side of, I think it's a positive. I think it's a unique selling point of Call of Duty and its esports, and it is something that nobody else can offer. Obviously, one of those points was these massive open events, and I'm hoping to see, with the Path to Pro this year, something similar of that feeling of everybody going to an event, because that's that's where I know that's where Tunn started. That's where I started. And hell, that's the first time I met you, actually, Rich, as an iSeries back in the day. Going to those kind of community events going forward. And I think that's a big, strong thing. And I hope franchising.
And I'm sure I was very, very sober and on my best behavior.
No, if I remember correctly, Rich, the exact first time we met was your argument with a friend of ours about, because you were doing journalism and we were streaming in the journalism area.
Yes, a classic. Yeah, I was actually thrown out of that event.
Yes,
because we tweeted about iSeries sponsors being a bunch of cunts, and we got fucking thrown out. I had my press pass revoked. It was great to meet you, though. That was a lot of fun.
But outside of that, the community, it was a lot of fun. I want to kind of talk about this localization thing, because we did touch on it briefly, but I don't think we've really kind of dived into it here. This what is essentially, because one of the things, and I've done media interviews in the past and talking about esports, and I love it because of its inclusion of people and the fact that I do regularly speak to people in America, like obviously you two right now are not based in the UK. And it's this localization. Do we think it's going to have a positive effect going forward? Because personally, for me, obviously, I end up following whatever UK players go anywhere anyway. But it does seem like right now it's kind of more about people following their favorite players. When do we think like the fans' minds will switch into, oh, you know what, I'm from New York, I'm following the Subliners regardless?
I'll let Marty fill that one first. I got my own views. I'm sure they're very different because, when Marty already spoke out about the kind of tribalism and Toronto Defiant, being a bigger brand than Splice or whatever, I do not attribute the geolocation as the reason for that. I just think Splice was a poor brand from inception.
Marty?
Okay, so what can I say that I didn't already say? I guess what I would say is, so here's something I'll talk about. So I'm from Western New York, and for those who don't know, we have the Buffalo Bills here. Okay, that's our NFL team. And in Western New York, it is almost like just a foregone conclusion that you're a Buffalo Bills fan. I have never been a Buffalo Bills fan. Never have been. And in fact, my little Defiant, no pun intended, self was like, I'm a Dolphins fan, which is their arch rivals. Okay. And I'm sure it had something to do with going against the grain and being a little punk rock kid or whatever you want to say. That's what I became a fan of. My sister was a Giants fan. She considers herself a little more worldly, if you will. And that was the big city team that was quote unquote local. And, I just use that as a jumping off point, but like one of the people that always really got me thinking about fandom, especially as I was working on building our organization, was my friend Brian, who was a fan of a very specific basketball player. I always laugh because very few people are fans of him, but that's Dwight Howard. And wherever Dwight Howard was playing, he was a fan of that team. And so we talked about that in the same way that happens in COD a lot. So I just named, 3 different people, myself, my sister, and my friend Brian, who all have very different reasons for having fandom, and none of those are related to localism, right? So even in traditional sports, this absolutely happens. Sometimes it happens solely because you don't have a local team. I love basketball. We don't have a basketball team in Western New York. I fell in love originally with David Robinson and became a Spurs fan. I became a Knicks fan because I lived in New York City for 10 years and I couldn't not. And that goes back to your local aspect. What I think is interesting is that you're going to have certain people that's what they're looking for, right? They're looking to be part of a local thing. They're looking to be part of something that is physical, being there together. And that's exciting. And I think that is really powerful. It's community, right? And then there's other people that all they care about is Scump's their favorite player, and wherever Scump's playing, that's what they're fandom of. And that's okay too. Like there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with either if there's a fan from Toronto who's been a fan of Hastro for a while and they're a Dallas fan, right? I think that mirrors traditional sports in a lot of ways. And I think it also creates really cool dynamics at events when that one person's wearing their Dallas jersey at a Toronto Ultra event, right? So I don't think that there's like just goods and just bads, or that it's all local or all not local. I think that there's a dynamic that says adding local adds another layer to it, right? It adds what traditional sports has, which allows you to say that what matters to me is being there with other people physically, and we're supporting the team here because they're our city, but it doesn't have to be the thing that drives for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the geolocation thing, it feels really regressive. And, I say that as somebody, I was around the first time we tried this, obviously in the CGS, with News Corps. I saw Odie in the chat. He was the GM of Birmingham Salvo, because we had crap names. back then too, guys. He didn't pick it.
Someone asked me to ask you about CGS franchising. Actually, I got a DM as soon as people found out you're on the show.
So we'll get into that.
CGS was cool. I won.
yeah, exactly. He wouldn't have been saying it otherwise. I'll tell you that for free. But anyway, in London Mint and all these, absurd names. And the bottom line is, I think while we're obviously in a much, much better place than we were in 2006 when it all kicked off, the reality is this. We spent so much time trying to tear down all these geographical borders with technology and better internet and connectivity. And having these huge global events, and global tours, tournaments all around the world, it seems incredibly regressive to then say, "Hey, we're in LA now, and this is going to be our home base, and our home games are going to be here. And if you're a fan in China, probably fuck you. You don't get to watch, and you'll never get to come here. And that's just how we're rolling these days." When I had this conversation with Hex, he said, if they gave me for the franchising, they really ought to give me 2 cities, one on each coast. It's the only way we would ever come close to encompassing what Optic brings to the table. And I totally agree with that. And in reality, even with 2 major cities, one on each coast, it wouldn't, this is old Optic I'm talking about, of course, not this shit show. That's got to go into this league. But the idea of it being localized to LA is so fucking regressive. It just seems crazy to me. And it's like, I understand from a marketing perspective, it's great because you get to say to a bunch of idiots that probably aren't particularly hardcore fans and are entry-level esports fans, this is your city. Did you know you have an esports team? Congratulations. Here it is. You have it by default, just like every other sports team ever. But there's a problem with that. Sports teams always operated on that premise. Esports teams have had 20 years of not operating on that premise. So get used to these endemic fans moving with the players, moving with the staff, even in sometimes if they're legendary. And that's going to make up the bulk of esports fans. You better cultivate these new rubes that are coming in super quick because, you only have to look at Optic. Why is Optic a fucking dumpster fire right now? Because everything that made Optic isn't there anymore. It is just this, logo. It is just this locale. It isn't Optic. It is a fucking empty shell. It is an empty vessel. The heart of Optic has gone elsewhere, and the fans have gone with it because that's what they care about. And esports is different to sports. We need to wake up to this fact. We hold ourselves up to the sports standard. It's nonsense. We're a very different beast.
So I want to agree with Richard on one thing that I say a lot, actually, the fact that esports is not sports. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think that sometimes sports people want to just make direct comparisons. I think there's plenty to learn, obviously, from sports and to take from their, decades of doing things and trying and seeing what works and didn't. But there's things where we're way ahead of them, right? Let's not pretend that they're even close to us in digital, for example. They're digital and most of sports is a joke. In fact, I laugh sometimes when I look at the way sports teams try to do Twitter because it looks like my grandmother's doing it, I'm like, is that a meme? Is that what you're trying to create there? Because that, yeah. So
it can get rough, that's for sure.
It definitely can. So I'm certainly there, and I agree with that. So I guess I look at it as, how would I say this? I'm aware that we've done a lot of things well in esports already. And so especially things that we've done well, such as, you mentioned open events earlier, is a great example, right? We've done those really well. So it's really easy to want to say well, if we've done this well, then that should be a model we go with. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I guess what I'm saying is I'm still of the mindset that we should still be trying different things, that we no one's figured out where digital is going to be in 5 years. It's still evolving, right? And so I don't think it's wrong to keep trying things. Maybe people will really enjoy being physically attached to a team, even if they're not there very often, right? If we've seen the schedule, they're not going to be there very often. They're going to travel a lot, but maybe that will be something that feels really great to fans. I often try to think of this as that I'm 40. Okay. I'm an old guy. I am not the majority of esports fans. And B, I have a very diluted is the wrong word. I have a very a view with just too much information, right? I tell my staff this a lot. We have so much more information than the average fan that it's hard for us to think like an average fan sometimes. What matters to them and what drives them on going, I like this team, or I'm going to watch this event. And I truly I truly believe that we've done a lot of market research on this. This isn't like things I'm just making up. Like we actually have gone out and talked to fans, saying, what do you like? What matters to you? What do you want to see in your team? That people do want to see something that that represents them and from a geolocation perspective. Not everyone, but some people, because there is a lot of city pride in a lot of these major cities too. If you go to cities like New York, LA, Toronto, Dallas, like there is an attachment to your city as your identity, right? Like it's part of who you are. So that's part of a lot of times why sports teams feel like so much of who we are, because that's an extension of that city being part of our identity. Can it be other things too? Absolutely. Like I said, I'm a San Antonio fan, and I am not a Texas person. I am nothing like a Texas person. But I just think it's an interesting trial to see like what this means to fans and their fandom and how we grow our audience.
I mean, for me, because I'm a cynic by nature, I'm sure you've cottoned on to this, guys.
That's we wanted to balance you, right?
Hopefully, this hasn't rocked anybody's world. But one of the things that I noticed again going on in Overwatch, what I figured out very quickly was, and this is why this is what I think is a big part of this geolocation master plan. Is I can't remember who it was, but they did an interview with the LA Times, and they said something along the lines of there's 40,000 players at a pro level available right now, which is horseshit.
I hate those stats.
Yeah, I mean it's complete nonsense.
Let me just tell my players that I've got 39,000 something waiting to stake their jobs.
Yeah, right? and now you suddenly see kind of the motivations for throwing that number out there so casually. The reality is that what they're doing is that when you have the franchise, when you have a geolocation, and you can't get relegated, what you're effectively saying is it doesn't matter what's going to happen. We're going to get the fans hitched to the team, and then it can be any old fucking bunch of players that represent us. It can be anyone. If these players want to unionize, fuck you. Then you're out the league. It's against your very restrictive contract, and we'll just get a bunch of ringers to play in place, and the fans won't give a fuck because they're not attached to the players. Activision Blizzard are a god-awful company with god-awful priorities, and all they care about is control and profit in tandem with each other. So don't tell me they haven't had conversations where they've gone, you know what would be great? If we could just have a bunch of fucking drones that bought a New Jersey every year to support a geolocated team, and we didn't have to put up with players that had more control and influence than us. This league enables them to do that, by the way. I mean, that's just a reality of it. Whether that gets actualized, I don't know. But I've certainly seen aspects of this over in Overwatch, and everybody should be very, very cautious. That's all I'm saying. I'm telling you, Bobby Kotick doesn't like the idea of a player with 3 million Twitter followers tweeting out that the league sucks, he's being underpaid, the situation's bad, this needs to change, that needs to change. He also doesn't like the idea that he can turn around to an owner, make a power play, go to another franchise, and suddenly they've got more followers and fans. None of these things behoove Activision Blizzard in the slightest. They will be smoothed out. Geolocation helps that.
Okay, I think that's interesting because for me it comes from several points, right? Like I've been in that part about players criticizing anyway. I've always thought that maybe players are probably too quick to tweet out anyway. I mean, like it's one of the things.
Human beings, not just players. Human beings are too quick to tweet.
Yeah, but here,
players more so than most.
But to take a slightly different tact here, and this is more directed towards Marty. I was very curious about the plans to you said tribalization, which by the way was a very bad word when I was in a union from the management. They didn't like that word. It's curious to me because right now I've obviously been to God knows how many Call of Duty events and other esports events as well, and there's always highlights in the calendar. The current scheduling doesn't really allow for more than 2 of those a year, and that's the big events, the big playoffs. Is there any worry, like Toronto-wise, of filling those stadiums, of engaging the community that come along to see Toronto specifically, or are you going to be like relying on? Because I imagine the biggest games, the biggest home games this year will be like Chicago Huntsman, because it's not people from Chicago; they're going to see the Optic brand again, essentially in its new form. And things like London, right? Marty, you were in Birmingham. I think you were.
One of my favorite experiences ever. That was the run where the crowd was chanting for our team and singing songs.
But that may not be the same anymore because they're going to be there for the London Raven, and we know, right? The London Raven spot is going to probably have one of the best crowds all year. It's going to be the Ravens all over the screaming and shouting. CWL London was very much the same thing. Other brands are going to struggle to imitate that same sort of fire. if the London Ravens aren't there, because they're not going to have the ability to pull the fans in the same way. There is a negative side to geolocation in that regards of having the same impact. Like, for instance, if Toronto throw their home games, and I'm sure that you guys are putting in all the effort to make the production high level and this great fan experience. But at the same time, if the London schedule was last week and they've got a group of people in the crowd going absolutely berserk, do you worry about making the same impact for the fans on the outside? Because they're going to say, "Oh, well, if I could, I'd rather go to a London event." Obviously.
I would be stupid to say that any owner probably isn't thinking about that all the time, right? And I would say that so are sports owners, especially as less and less people go to their games and are not going out for an NFL game or an NHL game, et cetera, right? In fact, Mark Cuban's been a really outspoken person about this, about how the NBA for the longest time would be just show up, see the game, and leave, right? And how do you make the experience from the time the person sees the building till the time they leave, 360 degrees. So it's a memorable experience. It isn't just basketball, right? You didn't just see a game. And that's we have this event director we recently hired, and she's 25. And I was just talking to her, about this whole experience being, I'm 40. Like I said, I'm not the target audience here. And the thing we had a conversation about is, I find it exciting that we only have a couple of events. And the reason I find that exciting is because a lot of the younger generation is looking for that memorable experience. I was at that one time, not, like you said, 73 season games of whatever baseball. I think that's how many, I don't know how many home baseball games you get, for example, right? And that's a really important opportunity to make it unique, to make it memorable, and to make it a place where you can say, I was there when. Being the classic esports nerd that I am, I've been to a bajillion BlizzCons, and one of my favorite parts of BlizzCon is not something that I experience, but something that I observe. It's those people that their identity is a bit like attached to how proud they are of having been to BlizzCon for so many years, and how they physically wear it. They have their pins out front, right? They're at the trading post trading some of the little pieces, whether it's pins or other things they got in their goodie bag, because it shows a little bit of what means so much to them, what's been so important to them in Blizzard games. And that's because that event is the same yet unique every single year. Now, I'm not saying we're throwing BlizzCon for our events. No one could, right? Like it's a once in a year event and very, very large. But the point is that the event makes it so that you don't go, I've done BlizzCon, I don't need to go back again, right? What you do is you're throwing an event that feels like something that I want to be at each time, because it's going to be something that creates a sense of like, I was there when. And part of that's going to be the gameplay, right? Like part of that, like when I go to a basketball game and say I was there the time that Carmelo Anthony just absolutely destroyed the Knicks and dropped 60 points, right? Like I was there when. Part of that is the gameplay, but you can't rely on that. Like there are going to be games where you're going to lose, for example, right? So that's this end-to-end experience of thinking how the fan walks through the door. And I'm a big acknowledge the fact that we get one shot for that, right? The first time they show up and they've paid for a ticket and it was not a free experience, and that they've walked in the door of a venue that most of us don't own yet. We're not there yet, right? That we're having to make do with whatever space we have in these large cities and do the best we can to put on that unique experience. But people are going to judge it based on that one time. So to go back to your original point, yes, like it's a very serious thing we talk about all the time. It's why we brought in people who are experts in creating esports events just to focus on doing our homestands. Like that's their only job, is to make sure we have awesome homestands,
Do you worry about the schedule at all?
Sorry, Brice, if I can just jump in and make a couple of points, and then so just something I didn't get to bring up earlier about why I believe the geolocation is kind of almost anachronistic at this point. If you look at all the sports leagues that have thrived on geolocation down the years, actually they're moving away from the geolocated model. They're playing games abroad. Look at the NFL. You have a game in London now. Why? Because it's global and they want to reach the fans. The Premier League are talking about having games in China and Saudi Arabia. Why? Because it's global and they want to reach those fans. And what we're doing is basically like, old school sports in 2019, when old school sports is moving away from that model. So it seems a little bit, again, it just seems so stupid and short-sighted, frankly. And the other point I just wanted to make is in terms of those events, I'll tell you from going to events 4 years and knowing esports fans, the idea of these regular season games, like holding people's attention and going to the same stadium every week to see the same team play and you're going to offer them this great experience that makes it worth it every time. How many mouse mats can I get signed? You know, how many times can I meet the players? How many times can I have, you know, Marty, throw a cocktail party for us all, and, you know, whatever it's going to be, whatever the entertainment is,
Totally.
you're now going to have to offer something unique every time, because that's kind of what the esports fans are used to. I saw this with E-League, by the way, when we did it. You know, we had if you stripped out the back of the stadium, I think you could get 400 people in there. Generally, we made room for 200. We gave the tickets away free. There's this thing in the industry called breakage that, maybe people listening don't know about, which is basically when you give away tickets for free, you think, oh, you would fill it every time. No, because it's zero commitment. So actually the breakage is high, the number of people that don't follow through and go. So, you know, you would give away 300 tickets, let's say, and 50% breakage. And then usually we get some events that were 80. Now, I saw some recurring faces that wanted to come and be on TV every week, but generally it was a different crowd. Every show, even people who lived in Atlanta didn't come regularly. And we weren't just giving them the best teams from across the world every week. We were giving it them for free, and we were putting them on television and including them in the show. I don't know what fucking planet some of these franchise owners are on if they think that they're going to have these big full stadiums that they're building. It's
something
just not real life.
Hey, just one, because on that specific point, I'm sorry I did to cut you off there, Brice.
That's okay.
But I just want to say that if we were about to do 50 games, and I'm exaggerating for just my point, then we would be speaking the same language there, Richard, 100%. Like, I have no idea. Like, let's be honest, like bobbleheads at the fucking stadium, who goes to that for baseball anymore, right? If you're going for the bobblehead, then you're probably just going because you're a baseball fan. That's the real reason you're going, right? But we're doing 2 next year. And I don't think that, I think I agree with you that if we were even doing 20, like that's an enormous number of commitment. I think there is a world where a couple things happen. Well, first of all, you create enough exclusivity, you may not get to go to all the events, right? So when I go to buy New York Knicks tickets, when I lived in New York, I could never get tickets to see LeBron. Those tickets were gone instantly, right? Yeah. And so like, even with their 41 games, I only really had access to 23 or 24 of those. So some of those things will be exciting purely for matchups. Then on top of that, we're not doing 41 games, right? Like I don't know what the peak will be, but I can't imagine us ever getting up to that point, at least not on the current model we're in. I don't think it's sustainable and even close to that. So that creates enough distance between events where you're talking probably a couple months since the last time you saw, or at least a month since the last time you saw Call of Duty. Shit, in basketball, I'd sometimes have tickets for the same week, right? And I'd have a purchase ticket sometimes and not even go, to your point, right? Like I'd have a basketball ticket and be like, something came up, you know what, I'm not going to go, but I already went this week. So it's a little bit less of a feeling like I need to go. But I think there's a breaking point where that certainly happens. And I think we have to be really aware of where the value goes down because we do it too often or too close to each other, or the value proposition isn't high enough to make you want to go more than one time.
Well, can I ask you an honest question? And again, I know I've had a little few digs at you, Marty, but I think you should know by now that's how I roll. Right? And it's just to ease you back in. And, you know, I don't hold grudges. It's just all part of the show, right?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a much different person than I was years ago anyway. Like I can't let this shit into my skin anymore, you know?
You see, because I think this debate has been healthy. I think, you know, we're pretty much 90% in disagreement with 10% of, you know, overlap in agreement. You could have been having healthy debates like this all the time because I always shoot straight and I always tell you what I think. And you didn't used to like that, but I'm hopefully we're all past it. Now, I swear this isn't a gotcha, and it's not to try and make you look bad, right?
Okay.
So obviously the Toronto Defiant Overwatch League ticket prices are out. Okay.
Yep.
And they're at to attend 1 week. These are a full weekend pass. If you want to be up in the bleachers, it's $97. If you want to have front row,
are these Canadian or US?
Canadian dollars, I should say. Yeah, 97 Canadian dollars. And if you want to be on the floor, so you're right close to the stage and you'll be in the shot and you'll get all those iconic moments, it goes up as much as 279 Canadian dollars. So my question to you is, you know, if I was an Overwatch fan and I wanted to go and see essentially the same team, the same players playing for the same franchise, with the same organizational team that's going to provide me the same level of entertainment, why do I pay that every weekend? That's a lot of money by esports standards.
Just jump in, Marty, before you jump in here, because this is something we were literally just about to talk about anyway. Because as well as
I know how to run a podcast, Brian. I'm in your mind.
I know. You literally jumped on my point just as I was about to bring it up. I've even got it up next to me. So the Call of Duty prices, some have come out, right? And it has been a hot topic with the community here. And I'm before we go to I'm in two minds, because some people are saying, oh, it's ridiculously high cost, and some people are saying, oh, that's fine for a few events in our city. Like for instance, I think we saw you can get a standing seat, I think, in Minnesota at the launch event for $25 for the day. I went to British Superbikes a couple of weekends ago for a stag do. Not really into superbikes, but the day in total cost me something ridiculous, like 100 odd quid, and I thought it was shit. But it's that kind of events, and I honestly think, like, it was outside, it was cold. Trust me, it was terrible. I went for the guy who
is your sort of thing. It has to.
I'm just picturing this right now.
I went for the guy who's it was his bachelor party, and we were having fun and a few drinks and stuff. But obviously, it was more his thing than mine. And I was sitting there thinking, well, that's a decent amount of money. And obviously, I'm trying to be objective here, because I enjoy Call of Duty. I haven't obviously paid for an event at Call of Duty as long as I can remember. But the truth is, I think it's subjective, right? Because a lot of these teams you're only ever going to see twice. If you're a Toronto-based COD fan, you're going to the two Toronto events unless you go to the mid-season split and the World Championship. You're going to go twice a year. There does seem to be a bit of a discrepancy in prices across all the sort of events. So I thought it would be kind of a more... And
full disclaimer, I've not looked at the prices at all. So,
well, I don't have all of them. I just have a few.
There's a couple of them. I put them in the chat on the... If you're at the bottom of Zoom, there's the one for Overwatch and for Call of Duty in there.
Got it.
And what I will say is, though, just what Bryce said, that not all of them are out as far as I'm aware. It doesn't look like anyway. But
I don't think everyone's on sale yet. I think it's just like some
like four or five.
Okay.
But no, go on, Mike. I just wanted to kind of bring that out, because that's where we were going next. So if you want to continue on your reply to Richard.
Well, I forget what we were talking about.
So I was just asking, why would somebody pay? I mean, even if we go with the lowest price, 97 Canadian dollars, why would they pay that every week for a full season to come and see the same thing?
Well, so we're only doing 2 events in Overwatch as well, right? So,
okay.
And like, I
but
think
the plan is to make it regular, right? I mean.
So I know that. So this is such a weird place to be. Like, I don't know what's public and what's not. When I can talk about what I can't.
I get it.
But I'll say this: like, I can tell you that we have conversations all the time of what is the quote unquote right model, right? And I don't think anyone thinks that we're going to just like land at it and be done. We're going to like try things and iterate and figure out what works best. I think what was really nice about 2 this year is it allows people to put on really much higher quality events rather than try to do a bunch of mediocre ones, because you have to do it so many times. Venue availability is also really hard if you're going to do more than a couple, because I mean, if you're Ariana Grande, you book a concert venue 2 years ahead of time. Like, that's how far in major cities, right? It is really, really far ahead. I don't think people realize that. We went out looking for our Call of Duty venue. It was very specific to get the size venue we wanted with the right logistics in the right location. It was like, here are the couple of dates you can have. That's it, right? And that's because of all these major tours. The sports have their schedules built out ahead of time. You name it. And that's Toronto, which is a pretty robust city with a lot of venues. You start getting to some, cities that are a little bit smaller. Like let's say Miami or let's say Minnesota. I have to imagine that there's even less venues available for them than there are in New York City or there are in Los Angeles, places like that. That's a guess, of course. But I think, hold the same view that you do, that I think the generation where I wanted to buy tickets to almost every basketball game and go to see the Knicks a lot, no matter if they were atrocious. This was a really bad team. You went assuming they were going to lose, and I would still buy tickets. I think that's going away, right? And so that's where you have to think about, what is that line? Is that line once a month I'm willing to go? Is that line only once or twice a year? And I think that that's something we're going to be trying to figure out over the coming years.
I mean, I happen to know, from just internal sort of conversations again over at Overwatch, they all talked about that. Was it the first Homestead one they did for Dallas Fuel?
Yeah,
the Dallas
4,500 sold out stadium.
Yeah, and again, because it's Activision Blizzard, they still had to sort of put out a statement that fudged the numbers. They said that it was sold out. Of course, they actually gave a significant portion of the tickets away. They even did a promo to give tickets away with the GameStop around the corner, where if you made any purchase at GameStop, you got a free ticket. You could go in there and buy a pack of gum and get a free Overwatch ticket if you wanted. So, there was no prize cap on it. So, there's always a bit. It's Activision Blizzard. You got to take everything with a fucking pinch of salt with them. Like it's marketing. It's bullshit. I get it. I know why they do it. I'm just glad that people, like me and as many others are sort of keeping it real about that. But the reality is, internally, while that should have been a huge success, it still didn't look from a financial perspective like it was going to be that even if every one of these live events was like that, it wouldn't be enough. That's what people were saying internally.
Well, and so I guess to be clear, from let's talk financial model as much as I can, because I think the average fan doesn't.
And again, I know you're in a weird spot. I do appreciate you talking about it.
Yeah, no, and I'll talk about this more, I guess, generally, right? So as we're looking at building on a financial model for any of these leagues or for anything we run, you can't just go, I have one revenue stream and I got to match that to cover my expenses, make a profit, right? I think we know this from the NFL, right? Like the NFL doesn't throw a game and go, this is how we're going to make all the money, is merchandise and sold in the stadium and tickets and food and beverage, right? Like that's not a very good business if that's all they do. Obviously, broadcast rights are going to be a big part of this. I don't think that, and broadcast rights is a tricky question or a tricky conversation, because I don't think broadcast rights has to always be, we give you $1 billion and we take your rights and go do stuff with it, right? Broadcast rights could mean taking the broadcast and monetizing against it, right? But the point being that the viewership is a large driver of that. I had an interesting conversation with someone recently where we were talking about the difference between watching a broadcast like League of Legends, where there's 150 people in the audience and you're really there for the League of Legends gameplay and that's it, right? You aren't seeing this hyped audience. It isn't an event, versus watching a Counter-Strike major, right? Where there's 15,000 people in the audience and that dead silence into the explosion of the crowd is part of what you're experiencing even when you're viewing at home, right? And so the audience is also, like, we equate the ticket sales to only the things that happen in the venue, which is selling tickets, merchandise, food and beverage, etc. But it also affects the broadcast, right? It affects what people are watching. Like, I think part of Overwatch Season 1 and 2 that's unfortunate is it's not that interesting to watch a venue with 350 people who support a mix of teams, so that only a few people get excited each time a team's on, and that's not going to create the hype and excitement theoretically. I mean, again, you mentioned this earlier, Brice, right? Like, we have to try and make this happen, like what happens in London, for example, for COD, but you can't create that with 350 people, right? You need a larger audience, or at least an audience that's specifically focused on your team, right? That your home team. We've seen some really cool examples of this where going into Dallas, as you mentioned, Richard, when the Dallas team played, the audience was crazy, right? And when the Dallas team wasn't playing, they were bored out of their mind, actually. So that's an interesting problem all by itself. What do we do when the Defiant isn't playing in our games and it's Team A versus Team B to keep fans from just going to the bathroom and watching their phones?
Yeah, and it's a problem we had, when we did the first major again with E-League for CSGO. We did it at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. It's this legendary, venue. A lot of history there. But what we found was, because again, it was a mix of fans. Some games were more enticing than others, and people were getting up, and it was like, this is a sold out venue pretty much. The crowd should look bigger. We were having to sort of corral people into certain areas of the stadium, of the theater, to just to sort of make it look like it for some of the lesser games that were in there at the finals. And then there are a lot of problems, because first of all, as well, the other thing we do in esports is absurd. I mean, where it's like, you come and here's 12 hours of content. It's a full fucking day. It's ridiculous. Here's, like, sit in your chair for 8 hours.
And by the way, sports people can't even fathom that we do this. Like, when I tell them,
I know, it's insane to them.
They're like, what? They're gonna be there for 12 hours? Like that? Like, we have to feed them how many times? Like, they run out of food sometimes. That's a real thing that's happened in the past. Major venues have run out of. Yeah. Oh God, London was completely barren bar, right? So you have that issue as well. It's like, are we trying to package too much in? And I think we are. I think one of the big things about esports is, right, we've got this disconnect going on. I don't think we're in a bubble, by the way. I know bubbles. I lived through 2 esports bubbles when they've popped. I've been there twice, and it fucking sucks.
2009 was the last one, and if you lived through 2009 and you were still in esports, you were either you're either fucking crazy or half cockroach. You know what I mean? It makes no fucking sense that anybody would be here. But anyway, the reality is that we've got this disconnect where we're telling everybody it's financially robust and we're all going to make money, and look at the franchise leagues and look what a slot's worth and look at the viewer numbers and look at the demographics and look at the investment. And then we're like, but we must cut corners when it comes to the product we put out. We must have 8 hours a day, 12 hours a day. We must cram in as much as we can into a weekend, into a broadcast, because to do it any other way would push the margins to breaking point. And that doesn't chime with me. Those two things are actually contradictory. We can either afford to do it right or like, in the franchising sports model, or we can't. So I definitely think that's a problem we've got to overcome. That's not even just unique to franchising. That's an esports problem in general, I think.
Yeah, and by the way, like Richard, this is something that I think that people don't realize is happening in esports that doesn't happen in traditional sports. It doesn't happen in concerts. So if a concert goes on tour, they build a rig and then they use it throughout. And they would, if they did one show, no chance to make any money, right? They would lose money. But the reason it works is because of that repeatability of a show. So we have two major problems when doing a show. One is that we have no repeatability. We have to do it the newer, bigger, badder set. It's got to be amazing. The fans are going, well, wait, what's new? What's different? And we want to deliver that every time, right? So when there's the next major or the next Call of Duty final, it's got to be different than the last one. And that costs a lot of money. The second thing is they don't have to give away a prize pool at every single event when you go to a concert or when you go to a football event or what have you. And so it's so overly expensive to run the event that the numbers, you're right, are really hard to add up. I think that's why seasons and leagues are at least something that people think makes sense to try and do, because A, it pushes all the prize money to the end, right? Like a traditional sport. And B, you can start to have repeatability, right? You can go, even if it's in Toronto and then next week it's in New York, we can share some resources, right? We can drive a rig in the same way they do for traditional concerts. So, Tom Petty would be going from one city to the next, his rig's going with them. So I think those two problems, and you're right, we see it all across esports. I mean, ESL famously, every time they do an event, it's got to be a little bit different, a little bit bigger, and they're losing money every single time because of this, because they can't create a sustainable model because of that. But imagine they could package that event, move to the next city, package that event, move it to the next city. You now have an opportunity. So that is esports wide. I think that for all the negatives that we want to say about leagues and stuff like that, that there's a very real problem that it can tackle in allowing it to not be $1 million for every event just for prize money and building a brand new set every single time.
Yeah, and you know what's good though? So with the ESL doing that, and I agree, obviously, if the financials are terrible, but what ESL can do, and I'm not saying they do this, but spoiler, they do this. They can go to they can go to somebody that's making like a piece of shit game, like some throwaway garbage that no one's gonna play, and say, holy fucking shit, we got a bunch of people already under this roof that can run a sick tournament for you. And it looks sick to the people that made this piece of shit game. It's beyond their wildest dreams, but it's in the ESL studio, which is like, it's in a part of Germany that looks like Mordor, and it's fucking square Eastern European geography, and they throw like a couple of like casters who they're like, they keep them on, but they haven't actually had like, tier 1 work in fucking years. And they're like, hey, John, Tony, can you just put the broom down? We got a fucking mobile game for you to do. They come out and it looks good, and they all got a fucking suit, they suit and a tie that they got for like £50, and it looks like they're professionals. You know what I mean? And they do that, and the developer goes, "Wow, that's awesome! Here's $10,000," and then that company immediately goes out of business. And ESL will do that, like however many times a year. That offsets the money they lose on having all these bigger and better live events. A franchise league doesn't have that luxury. What it's got is a massive slush fund of naive millionaires and billionaires that paid way too much up front. That's the crucial thing. But eventually that reservoir runs dry. And I think that's what everybody needs to be terrified of, because it's starting to happen in Overwatch. If anybody thinks, by the way, Overwatch 2 is anything than a way to get a one-time cash injection into Overwatch, I got a bridge to fucking sell you. But I think for the COD guys, I'm just saying, just be dubious, because I don't think COD is in a place where, you know, Overwatch, it's largely irrelevant whether it succeeds and fails because these brands aren't part of the fabric, you know. But if the COD franchise league fails, that's really bad for esports because of the history of everybody involved. So, you know, I mean, that's kind of where I'm at with it at the moment.
Fair enough. I'm going to take that point to kind of move on to this last question before we go to questions from the chat. There is one thing I was very curious about here because we've spoken about, you know, these teams moving across, and there have been some pro players saying, you know, essentially they're going all the way from America to London to play one best of 5. Or could be a best of 5. We don't actually know the exact format yet.
And American football teams fly to London to play one game.
Yeah. I disagree with the pro players anyway. But it is interesting looking at some of the schedules. I don't know if every team goes to London at some point, which means if you're a fan, you won't be able to see them. I kind of have to confirm that.
I'll get the schedule up.
There's 8 teams going over in the first one. So I just needed it confirmed about the traveling and such, because obviously I don't have the most sympathy for pro players in regards to the traveling schedule. I'm not going to lie to you. I know how much some of them are on, and for most of them the answer is too much. But the truth is, realistically, you know, this is the new way things are going to be done here. If you go to this, there's going to be your scheduled games, whether it's 1 game or 2 or 3 or whatever, and the amateur tournament going on, and that's how you're going to have to play exactly. So I think
the original schedule for Overwatch was insane, by the way, for the talent and for the broadcast talent and for the players alike. And they whittled this down, but it's still a lot of traveling from a player base that isn't used to traveling, because the only event, they just literally lived in shit housing with 3 people to a room near the Burbank studio, and that was all you had to worry about. Now you're traveling.
I don't know about anyone else, but we did not have 3 people to a room.
No, I mean, okay, I'm exaggerating, but there were definitely franchises that did. I've seen pictures, which unfortunately I can't leak because it identifies people, and Activision Blizzard wouldn't like that very much. But let's just say not all housing is wonderful in the Overwatch League. But anyway, the point is that the schedule was a fucking nightmare, and it could rapidly get like that in COD 2 as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, I'm just cross-referencing here. It looks like Optic Gaming never go to London. Is the first time I can see just straight out the gate. They never go there.
Yeah. So look, just I'll say that just watching the process happen both in Overwatch and in COD, I know that scheduling, I mean, they say this in traditional sports, like scheduling is like an insane thing for sports league, right? It's like multiple people, it's their full-time job to run the schedule because it's so difficult to do with travel and trying to get the right balance so that people play the teams in their division and so on and so forth, right? So I think that there's certainly, especially because we're coming from the open idea, as you said, Brice, right? Like you're used to every team's going to show up. In fact, I remember in 2016 when we didn't go to Orlando because we couldn't afford it at the time. Like, it was a big deal. We're like, nope, I cannot fly my British-based team over to Orlando because it's just too expensive, right? And to your point, like, people were expecting to see all of the teams, right? So that has become, that's a bit of like, that's what we're used to. I would say that maybe it's a bit of like an example of what Richard said, though. There's a nice example, a nice switch here where we're not jamming so much content in, right? We're saying there's just enough COD content in the weekend to make it a good event, but it's not 12 hours, right? It's a couple of days. I think it's 6 hours over 2 days, so maybe 12 hours total content. And that to me feels really good too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So that's at least how I view it. Like, I totally get there being fans are like, I can't believe I can't see my team, right?
Yeah. No, I thought it was curious because obviously, like, one of the things, and I don't know if we go too much into this now, is obviously there is the idea of expansion. And I saw at one point the idea of eventually there being 32 teams in this was being bandied around. I don't know how many years off that is.
Oh, I never heard that one.
I saw it somewhere, and I was like, 32 teams. I was like, you're gonna have your mate Dave playing in one of these as the star roster. I don't know if you can get that.
I don't know if that was the original plan. What you have to remember is, with even now with Activision Blizzard, you've got all these fucking suits that came in that don't come from an endemic esports background. So what they do is they look at a number they think is healthy for a sports league, and they come in and they float that. You know, the Pete Vlastelicas and Bobby Kotick's that don't have a fucking clue. they come in and they float that number, and then eventually over a period of time, the esports people sort of wear them down and go, actually, yeah, we should start with this realistic number over here. That's generally how the process goes over at AB right now.
Fair enough. All right, let's move this on now into questions from the chat. I will be skipping over any ones that aren't very good or that mean we have to spend another 2 hours discussing them. So, what's the best case scenario for the COD League? I think that's an interesting one. I honestly, like I said before, I just want to see it up at tier 1. I just want to see it recognizes a tier 1 esport as it moves forward. It has these unique elements to it. It has its own challenges. And while I'm sure there are people at Activision Blizzard and involved with the competitive side that realistically want 8 million people watching every month, every event and all this sort of stuff. I just want to see it recognized in the elite tier of esports in 2, 3, 4 years.
And I think probably one of the bigger issues around this is the game right now. State of the game is more of an issue, I would say, than anything. From a general public and professional player standpoint, there's issues right now. We all know there's issues right now. They need to be fixed.
Can you confirm this for me, Chris? Because obviously, I talked to some pros and whatnot recently, and a lot of them were telling me actually they are playing more COD Mobile than actual.
I wouldn't like to say. I know a lot of them do play COD Mobile, but I would say that professional players right now, if they were playing more COD Mobile than they were scrimming, I would be wondering where their priorities lie, I suppose. Although saying that, the game right now, a lot of...
Well, remember what Marty told you where the priorities lie. They've got guaranteed contracts, so it's all good.
Not a contract here, right?
All right, so I'll put that question to you then, Rich. What do you think is the best case scenario for the Call of Duty League?
I mean, listen, dude. Fuck.
Be positive, Rich.
You gotta be an optimist for a second here.
Okay, so best case scenario, when it crashes and burns, it doesn't leave a crater so big it creates an event horizon that sucks all of esports into it and kills us all.
I thought we were going to get him to be an optimist for a second.
Yeah, no. That for me is honestly the best case scenario. This is everybody involved with these franchise leagues for Overwatch and Call of Duty. I just want everyone to have their eyes open. This is a story you tell 5 years from now. Like, oh, I was involved in that and fucking hell, it was crazy. It was wild. I've been there. I did it with fucking CGS. Everybody thought it was going to last. Like, I know the landscape is different, but here's the problem. Yeah, the landscape was different, but they took all the fucking same bad ideas and regurgitated them. And there's no amount of money that's going to insulate you from this abject failure that is impending. I hope the right people get out with money. That goes without saying. I hope a lot of people, I hope all the endemic esports people get paid off the asset flips that come when the next bunch of moronic VC people come in and buy these overpriced assets. But honestly, let's be real. It's not here in 5 years. They're not building something to last. They're taking advantage of the esports fad because Activision Blizzard feel that they've been due something from the esports fad. Like, they honestly believe in their heart of hearts they created esports and they should be paid for it. And you only have to know, and I've told this anecdote before, but this is all you need to know about AB's thought process. When Twitch got bought by Amazon for 970 million or whatever the fuck it was, Blizzard were like, yo, Twitch, great job on the sale. How much of that do we get? And Twitch went, what do you mean? And they went, well, but it's our games on your platform that you broadcast, and therefore we've helped build you, so we should get some money, right? And Twitch are like, that. What about all the free advertising? And that essentially is what streaming is. And they got super pissed off, and they wanted to have their own streaming platform. They were in talks with the fucking train wreck that was Azubu. They were going to buy that and then try and strong arm Twitch. If you remember why they did the Overwatch League preseason on MLG TV, it was a flex so they could get that bullshit $90 million deal for 2 years, which, by the way, they ain't getting that this time around. So Activision Blizzard believe that they're owed something for their accidental creation in esports. And they think this is how they get it. But the longevity on this, if I was a betting man, 5 years tops.
I don't think we're asking the worst case scenario. Marty, I'll ask you in terms of, like, because obviously as a business, and I don't know how much you can go, your projections for your best case scenario, because I imagine like it will be an optimistic projection, but also at the same time, I imagine it has been talked about realistically in the back end.
Yeah, like, look, I'm not going to tell you guys that we're going to be filling the bird's nest in China the way that League of Legends did, and that we're all going to be, we're going to have $1 billion TV deal. Like, that's just stupid, right? So realistically, I think that a couple things are going to, like that in that really good case scenario, we're going to be very competitive with those top eSport titles you talked about, viewership wise. I think COD as a game has the audience available out there for it. We're not like going to find people and say, you should start liking COD. They already like COD. They just don't know the eSport exists. You know, there's a very small percentage of people that play Call of Duty that have any idea competitive Call of Duty exists. Okay. The second thing I think is that we create a kind of a neat door for the non-esports fan for industry to like create a bit more of a like, oh, this is accessible to me. This makes sense to me because Call of Duty is so regular, quote unquote, in regular culture, right? Like it's Johnny Football, who we talked about earlier, plays Call of Duty, right? And he doesn't necessarily play League of Legends or Counter-Strike or something like that. So it's like, we can say all we want. We don't need those fans. That's fine. But it's nice that it creates a more of it becoming part of pop culture for us in our industry. It certainly helps monetize it easier when it does that. It's a much different conversation with advertisers and things like that. And the third thing, and I think this is not just Call of Duty, but I think this is in general across esports. We see digital advertising finally finish its move over, where people aren't dumping garbage money into television and getting really poor returns for it. They understand how much value there is in advertising in the digital market, and so the value of an impression, not just on the broadcast, but to these players, these huge. You know, you're going to see players with opportunities to have, I won't say sneaker deals, but whatever the equivalent is to that, you know, because the value of what we bring, whether it's the player, the teams, the games, etc., will now provide brands to actually fight over it, right? If it's just Budweiser, then they don't have to pay anything. But if it's Budweiser and it's Molson and it's Anheuser-Busch, et cetera, you know, if it's, well, I just named two of the same brand. But if it's all those fighting, that's when you start to get the real value. And I think that we're on the precipice of that as an industry, and that's what's going to provide a lot of the value here is digital advertising really being what it's paid, what it's worth.
Fair enough. I think that's a kind of a comprehensive answer. Two quick questions that I think we could knock out very quickly. Miles the Ross asked, how was the food at the eSports Awards? Truthfully, the first thing was basically just a tomato covered in something. And the second
it's not barbecue, you don't want to know anyway.
Second one was a fantastic steak.
Covered in something. It was a tomato mozzarella salad
starter
with a vinaigrette.
It was awful.
Brice didn't like it. He's got no class.
Richard, you wouldn't believe the amount of times I've been dragged to the Hard Rock Cafe at events. Every single fucking time.
Yeah.
Never anywhere cultural.
Great place.
Put it this way, considering it was essentially mass catering food, it was surprisingly good. I mean, that's the reality.
That was a fantastic steak.
It was for 500 people. The steak was good, wasn't it? I mean, mine was a little bit oversalted, but again, I'm not going to fucking complain because they got to cook them for 500 people and bring them all out at the same time. You know?
I've worked in mass catering. It's hard shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And keeping going back, I was thoughts on the COD Friendship League and the lack of professional recruit on both the player and staff front. Honestly, I'm not really going to go into this because I think I've made my point very, very clear over the last month. And I hope in the next few years it gets better and the infrastructure is now in place. And I said that, right? I said I believe people will be weeded out. There'll be better training. People will be more recognized for their actual skills than what's currently happening.
Yeah, there's been a few of the substitutes announced this week, which has really brought this one up. And I think a lot of the pros sort of did clap back at it to a point. To say, are you even talking to people at events? You guys need to network more, etc., etc. But the pros shouldn't be making these decisions anyway. That's sort of the bugbear that we've had for the past couple of months, Bricey, at this point. And I don't want to speak for Toronto specifically, Marty, obviously, but
I actually will touch on the subject. Because this was a challenging offseason for exactly this reason. That the players, and I'm not talking about any specific players, so don't take this to me pointing at our players or anyone else's, but a lot of the players wanted to take control because that's what they're used to, right? They're used to saying, squad of 5, who wants to sponsor us, right? And I hate that phrase, by the way, sponsor us, because it just degrades what it is we're doing for them. It implies we're just giving them a jersey and saying good luck, right? But we really took it as an opportunity to take some risks on some younger players and some people who showed real promise. It could be some people like Kleenex, who literally had one event, but a really spectacular one, or it could be players like Cammy, who was unlikely to get a lot of people pay attention to him because he's not from America. And a lot of these subs are American subs, and it's a lot of the same recycled folks that are going to get the sub spots in other places. And what is exciting to me is that we may be wrong, right? And some of those guys may not turn out to be good, or we may have uncovered the next great player that way. That's what the substitute spot is supposed to be about. It isn't like Blizzard requires a spot, so you hire somebody, so let them get their buddy on the team to make them happy. And that's a hard transition, and I get it. They've been last 15 years or however long, they've been allowed to operate this way. And I really want to emphasize, I'm not trying to say in a negative, like the players did something wrong by operating that way. It's just that's what they're used to, right?
Yeah, no, I get it, and like I said, I've said this about a few things, and I believe it'll get better, right? I think there is a lack of staff out there that can do the job properly, and obviously, if you're coming in from a VC side, you genuinely have no idea who is who from who, so that's how it kind of works out. This next question is very interesting because obviously it's subjective, and I actually don't know the numbers, but someone was asking how much they thought Scump would be worth based on his following and everything involved. And we've talked briefly about this, about obviously the salary cap being a thing, and Scump bringing essentially a brand. He can bring a brand himself, more powerful than most of these orgs can in marketing alone.
Multiply that with the fact that he's on the team with Hex.
How do you even go about quantifying a player like that? Like, I don't know if Marty, if you even reached out to him or what your thing was in the off season, but I found it very curious for outlier players like him, because how do you put a price on essentially kickstarting your brand ahead of everyone else?
So you're very right? Like, there is a huge value if you're an organization who wants to see a bump in brand right away, that someone like Scump, and he's not the only one, right? But he's obviously the most iconic, can give you, and that has incredible value. There was an interesting conversation a few years back about Kobe Bryant in the same way, where if you're signing Kobe Bryant, he's such an outlier in the value, not just that he provides to a team, but the Lakers themselves, right? Like, was the identity of the Lakers. And so even in the NBA, which they're making these monumental salaries, you can make an argument that Kobe Bryant is worth $100 million a year, right? Because the amount of money he makes for the Lakers, the amount he tracks other players, the championships, you name it. And I think every sport has these people, and it's attributable to the team a little bit too, because your point, you said Hex, because he is the team in that example. It's multiplicative in that scenario, where he's worth even more because he's paired with Hex, right? Than he would be on his own. And then there's also himself coming to a new team, So I think that he's absolutely worth more than raw skill by some multiple, and it depends on what your goals are as an organization. They're interesting. I saw someone mention Smite in there, so it just made me think of this. There was a Smite team this year that decided to just get the popular players, and they were streamers, right? And they weren't good, right? They didn't win anything, but that's an interesting thing. Echo Fox did the same thing with their academy team, right? They got 5 streamers and made an academy team, and it was just a pure play. And how could we drive viewership? And of course, there's the Counter-Strike team that did it for a while, where the 5 guys got together as streamers and just played competitively, right? The simple answer is yes. There's no way to put a number on it, but there is a huge value there as well. And it's going to always be outside the salary cap for sure. It's that one outlier or a couple of outliers who is going to be most affected by a salary cap by far.
Yeah, I think so. I think he's an exception. Obviously, I think it kind of helps the fact that Hex is in Chicago. It probably kind of brought his price down from what he, because I don't know what he could ask. I have no idea on how to value that kind of outlier.
Looking at the Chicago team, none of them should be on. There's too many superstars on that team for them all to be on like supermaxes, to a point of what we've heard on other teams who have only got like one. You would imagine it would be very average across the board, I would think, unless they obviously are getting taxed the luxury tax, yeah. But who knows?
There was a question here asking about when do they start expecting to see these CDL franchise teams making a profit, and I thought that was very curious, because even from a positive standpoint, the simple truth is that these teams, I don't think, are looking to make a profit anytime soon. The value to these brands and these investors is the increase in so what is the word for it? It's the increase in the brand value over time. Like if you lose, 2-3 million a year, but your brand's worth 10 million in 5 years, obviously that's a negative. But roughly saying that's where it's coming from. It's looking at the idea of this building this investment over time and having it worth more in several years. And I know, Rich, you talked about it briefly, saying the next year's buy-in could be X amount more, and so on and so forth. And that's
it will be
perceived value of a brand. You buy them at 25 million this year, you spend 5 million on players, staff, infrastructure, events. Next year, technically, your brand is worth more. And if you were to sell it, you would, or you should, end up making a profit that way. And that's what the
I don't know about
do.
I don't know about the COD percentage of sales, but how it works in Overwatch, and this is public information, so this is insider information. If you sell your franchise, 25% of that sale immediately goes to Activision Blizzard. I don't know if it'll be similar for COD or the same or more or less, but how it works in Overwatch, whatever you build, when you sell it, 25% is an immediate kickback to AB. So wild.
Yeah. Someone asked, go on, Marty.
Yeah, but just to answer the question you asked, or I guess to touch on it. So in esports in general, this is not even just franchise league. In esports in general, I don't think any organization is like going, I've nailed down the data, I'm going to be profitable, and it's very concrete, right? Because our industry is evolving so quickly. I like to use the phrase that we do 10 years every year, right? And because it's digital, it moves so much faster than traditional sports, so on and so forth. And so what we're doing is trying to take the data in front of us to make the right decisions to continue to grow closer and closer to profitability as organizations. So when I say that, I mean overactive media for us, meaning owning multiple franchises. Same thing for Cloud9 or any of the organizations that own more than one franchise or more than one team, period. So not Astralis, right? Not teams that are literally a single brand, single team. I guess they're not anymore anyway, right? Because they have a League of Legends franchise. This is how we've been on this podcast for over 2 hours. I'm like sitting here, like I'm starting to. My brain is starting to slow down.
This is nothing. This is like the warm up. I'm gonna crack out the whiskey. Like where's the good shit coming?
Yeah. So overall, that's why I used the term earlier that like it's not a sprint. Like we're talking about like long term. No one's looking to get a profit in 3 years and get out. I mean, if they are, I think they're stupid. I think they're doing the wrong thing getting into this. And the people that I've heard certainly aren't. They're understanding that this is going to take investments over a number of years. So if you take the example of earlier, you said something like, when you're paying all this money to these people, what do you get out of it? The enterprise value is the phrase that's used. So what is overactive media worth as it grows over time? But it isn't just to flip it, right? We're not trying to flip a non-profitable thing to somebody else. Instagram is probably the most iconic one, right? Like they didn't make a dime and they sold for $1 billion, okay? But that's because it was something that Facebook went, aha, we can take this and we'll make way more than $1 billion on it. I think what every esports owner with any brains in their head is looking at is, there's a period of time where we will turn this business profitable, and you'll be able to have real projections that show growth over time because you'll have a history of data to look at, especially when you're concrete in certain leagues. The fact that you constantly cycle games and constantly shift like the way leagues work and the way you monetize has been really hard to say, what do I think I'm going to make next year, right? Even next year, not 5 years. Whereas if all of a sudden we have 3, 4, 5, 7 years of data on, let's say, Call of Duty, for example, I can predict the next 4 or 5 years out. The NFL does this, right? We're not ever going to be 100% right. I don't think anybody ever is when they budget their business. I've worked in lots of different types of businesses. But I will say that it's not about profitability for, quote unquote, one league or any other league right away. It's about taking the entire organization over time to profitability.
That's fair. Yeah, I think that, like I said, it was. It's one of those things like people are asking, and this is more some of the fans or people who don't understand that other side of it. They're asking, how are you going to make bank, 25 million? Well, it's not about instantly turning a massive profit, or everybody will be doing it already. So it's a very, very curious one in that regard. One last question from the chat, because like you said, it has been over 2 hours.
And my wife's been texting me wondering when I'm coming up to dinner.
It's fine.
See, this is the advantage of being a fucking incel. I can do podcasts all day.
Oh man. Here's a good one. What mistake that other esports have had that you want to avoid? And I think that's a very curious one because, like Rich said, there have been franchise attempts in the past that haven't gone well, and kind of going for it. I think for me,
All of them.
I think the biggest mistake I kind of want to see avoided is removing that sense of community, because it's the reason I fell in love with esports. I've been to a dozen esports now. They all feel very different. I love kind of the first game I played competitively. Well, sort of. I was in Halo first, but this is the one where I think you have to move in the correct way, and I believe there will be more checks and balances to come in Call of Duty. We did touch on it at the beginning, and I actually have something planned for a future episode about players' associations. There needs to be the checks and balances because everything has to balance each other out in the end, right? Otherwise, people become unhappy, and you get this sort of negative thing that snowballs, and you don't ever want that in something that's supposed to be around for the next decade, 15 years. So realistically, I think Call of Duty now, it's got to make its steps very, very careful every single year, because not only, before it was, new games come out, who we get in, what are the biggest teams this year? We 5 of the same orgs, but then we've got these other orgs and basically just do whatever the hell they want. This year, all 12 franchises and possibly more in the future have to make sure everything's correct from the Activision side, from the player side. It's very much more involved, to the point where I actually said, I think even the move into franchising, which we've seen coming for years, still feels very, very rushed. Like, I still feel lots of things like teams are scrabbling, trying to get everything sorted, even now. We're only about a month and a half away from the start of the actual league.
I think this is just an esports thing, though, isn't it? Is that things happen late. It's not one of these. I mean, there's been a big Twitter conversation this week about talent being asked by tournament organizers like weeks out. Like it's across the board. It's not just, I want to say that the franchising side of things, which I know it should really be one of these things that is more planned in advance, but it has felt rushed. It's felt very rushed.
Can I use the overused word here and say that mine is authenticity? I'm not going to name any specific events, but I'm going to say there are some events out there that I watch it and I cringe, right? Like, it doesn't feel like they have any idea what we want to see. And they just they do too much sportsing it up, or we'll call it like network televisioning it, and I'm not even talking about television, to be clear. I think E-League actually has a great product, which oddly it is the one television product, but I think they make it look like it belongs on ABC sometimes, and the phrase Richard said earlier of "we're not sports" is really important. So I want to make sure that we don't lose that authenticity in our broadcasts and in our events that makes you feel like this is, there's that super cheesy, everyone makes fun of Riot video. This is our sport or whatever, right? But what's nice about that phrase, though, is it's true, though. It is ours. And part of what attracts us to it is something about what we love about gaming, what we love about competitive gaming. And sometimes events feel like they're trying too much to cater to absolutely everyone. And then it becomes less for the people who really are the core fans.
That's fair. I think that's a very fair thing, Rich.
Yep.
What about you?
You kind of throw me up, me having the last word on it. No, I mean, look, I don't really actually have any sort of conflicting opinions from Marty there. I think the identity aspect of it's very important, and I'd struggle to pick apart anything that he said, honestly. I think the reality when it comes to scheduling in esports, the reason it happens as late as it does, which is what Chris was talking about, things feeling rushed, they feel rushed because they're rushed, because there's so many different moving parts that you have to kind of get on board for approval, and so many different parts that you have to take into consideration. That what happens is it goes to a committee, and then they go, okay, well, yeah, we're okay with it. And a bunch of people go, well, we're not okay with it. And we need to be okay with it because, we're a stakeholder. And then it has to change, and then it has to change, and then it has to change. I mean, this is just the nature of the esports beast. When we're nowhere near getting to a stage where we can plan an esports event 2 years in advance, like the Ariana Grande concerts that Marty obviously goes to.
I could name an Ariana Grande song if I tried. Is the funny part.
We all got our cross to bear.
Dude, I'll admit I'm a huge Taylor Swift fan. There, I'll just put it out there. Okay, so that's the one for me. So
hey, whatever floats your boat, bro. But the reality is when we're not going to be at that stage because a game can die in 2 years, right? I mean, our industry is fucking crazy. It's quicksand. So if you are like, hey, we'll plan this event in 2 years because Overwatch is the hot shit right now, or Smite's the hot shit right now, and then you have a rough year and you cancel all esports support for the game, you also have the additional loss of having booked this unbelievably spectacular venue that made sense in 2019 but makes zero sense in 2021. And this is why everyone's hedging their bets, because it's a lot of fucking money on the line. I don't necessarily support that approach. I think big corporations should put their fucking money where their mouth is. If you're out here doing press conferences telling me your game's going to last forever and it's the best fucking game of all time and your esports scene is robust and it's worth a $25 million investment, then book your shit in advance. But, at the end of the day, it's never going to be like that. So I think that's kind of just maybe in 10 years we turn the corner. And we're not doing this, but, 10 years is a long time in esports, right?
Oh, it's a very long time. All right. Well, I think that will wrap up questions from the chat. So this will be last statements or anything else you guys want to kind of say as the last ending here. We'll start with you, Marty.
I'll just say that, well, first, thanks for having me on. This is fun.
No problem.
I haven't done a podcast in quite a while, actually.
That's right. We're trying to get Toronto. We're trying to get Toronto as a Toronto-specific podcast in the future. So,
okay, all right. I might know some people. But no, the one thing I'll just say is, I think that it's very healthy for us to have these conversations in esports because nobody has the right answers yet because we're all building. There's a famous phrase that Reid Hoffman says that creating a startup is like jumping off a cliff and building the airplane while you're going down, right?
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing in esports, right? We're building the airplane as we go down. And so we got to keep trying different things. And by the way, none of us have built an airplane in some cases, or we built different kinds of airplanes. So it is a really kind of a crazy thing we're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's healthy to have conversations and to have discussions when we're trying different stuff. But I'm really glad we're trying different stuff in esports. And I'm glad that we're not just happy with the status quo where companies are barely hanging on and constantly having to drop games and getting relegated and players didn't make much money. And now, like I often say this, I really can't wait to pay my players millions of dollars. I'm probably making millions of dollars too, right? And that's a really good thing to feel like. So in order to get there, we have to take some of these times to make to try things out, right, and see what works to build for the future.
Awesome, sounds good to me. Rich.
First things first, obviously, glad me and Marty, you've buried the hatchet very publicly. This is a monumental moment, reminiscent of the destruction of the Berlin Wall. I hope everybody remembers it. And, we can talk about this in 10, 20 years from now as being this perma-thawing of esports hostilities. But the other key thing is, I think, listen, if you're like me and you're apprehensive about franchising, which I think you're very right to be, and if you're a Call of Duty fan, you think it's going to be the thing that destroys your game. Listen, I'm the most pessimistic person when it comes to corporate endeavors you're probably going to encounter. But the good news is I genuinely do believe that esports is so far past having to worry about that. In fact, the good news is there's a bunch of investors that haven't invested yet in esports because they're waiting for these endeavors to crash and burn. And as soon as they do, they're telling me they're going to come in and make a killing on the flaming wreckage that they're going to be able to exploit. So the beauty is we've grown to a point now where we are recognized as a robust investment. Not all investments are equal within our space. But I think, honestly, let Activision Blizzard do this, see where it goes. I'll be the first to eat humble pie if it works out, because I've been wrong before. Remember, I did say League of Legends was Babby's first MOBA and it would never succeed. So, I am far from fucking Nostradamus on this shit. We'll just wait and see. But like, nothing can fail so bad it kills esports anymore. We're totally past that point. We're completely legitimized.
Fair enough. Tunn?
Nothing from me apart from thank you to the guests coming on. This will obviously be on Spotify. It will be on Apple Music. For anybody who came in late, it will be on YouTube, etc., etc., etc. Just follow the links if anybody who didn't follow the channel. Follow Twitter at EGL. And other than that, I think for everybody who's asking where Hex was, if you were late, he unfortunately got his times mixed up. Thought we were doing 8 p.m. Dallas, but of course we all will all be asleep by that point. Well, me and Brice will, to be fair. And he said he'll be coming on next week, so if anyone was wanting to know. And other than that, thank you for everyone in the chat interacting. Good episode. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so.
That was a good episode.
Yeah. So
one of my favorite podcasts I've done this year, you know.
Oh, thank you very much. I do appreciate that.
Genuinely mean it.
You're welcome back. I do have another a show idea where I can use you, and I have another show idea for Marty as well.
Where are they now? First episode, Goatsy. No one gets that reference. That's fine. Okay. We'll leave that one on the vine. There must be someone in the chat. I'll do that show, though. Big fan. There you go. Devil Walk gets it. Thanks, buddy.
So, as I was about to say, so the idea of a Spitfire going forward is I do want to get all the teams on at some point to meet the actual teams that behind that, because we've talked about them at length, and I'm trying to get that all organized, as well as some very specific episodes I have in mind in regards to esports infrastructure. The most important thing, though, if you are watching this and you have got with us to the end, is Spitfire was started as an educational tool for people in Call of Duty esports, because I do see a lot of people don't understand parts behind the scenes, and we try to bring on experts. And a big thank you to Marty and Rich for coming on and giving two sides of the viewpoint. It's very, very important we do this. You can't shut down anything negative. It can't always be, the PR side of it. So it's exactly what I wanted from Spitfire, to be perfectly honest with you, to give people the chance to be educated and make your own mind up from different viewpoints. So again, thank you so much, Rich and Marty. This has been Spitfire. We're live on all platforms at the moment. Thank you so much for coming and watching, and we'll see you all next time.